Wales, it's a mixture of sunny spells and showers. Most of the showers will be across Western England and Wales. Drier and brighter for South East England and still warm, particularly where the sun is shining.
A brighter outlook with Boxed Solar. Proud sponsors of weather on GB News.
Hi then, Lee Anderson here. Join me on GB News on my new show, The Real World, every Friday at 7.
What you get for breakfast is something that, if we do our jobs right, you will wake up to news that you didn't know the night before.
It's a conversation. It's not just me and Eamon.
We want to get to know you, and we want you to get to know us.
From 6, it's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Monday to Thursdays on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Mondays to Thursdays on Farage, here on GB News. We will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
When the news happens, it happens here.
And really important breaking news.
Breaking news this morning.
On TV, radio and online, the news starts here on Britain's Newsroom.
All the biggest stories and the answers that you need from across the UK and beyond.
Join Britain's Newsroom from 9:30 on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Patrick Christie's, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
People in Britain, they love free speech, but they also love fair play.
I don't care if I'm speaking somebody from a trade union, from the Labour Party, somebody from the SNP. And I think the viewers like to see that actually we can challenge one another, but in a positive way.
We think we ask the questions that people want to ask, and often we ask the questions that we wanted to ask in Parliament but never got the chance to ask.
So join us every Saturday, 10 a.m. till noon on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Hi, I'm Dan Wootton. You can watch me live on GB News Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. And did you know that you can also watch and listen live on our website, gbnews.com. You'll always be up to date on the latest breaking news, as well as enjoying the best stories, opinions and shows. You can even join the debate under our live player as you're watching. So head straight to gbnews.com on TV, radio and online. GB News, Britain's news channel.
It's all about family, being in people's living rooms, all the interaction and getting to know who our viewers and listeners are.
When I was young, my dad used to say, "Nana, stop arguing." I wanted an outlet that would enable me to give my opinion.
People are going through a really hard time right now, and I know that you don't feel like you're being listened to by the establishment. I came to GB News because it's the People's Channel, and I want the audience to have their say on the events of the day.
We're dynamic. We do something different. Democracy shows that the wisdom of the nation is in its people.
I get to travel to find out what the story is from a personal perspective.
The British people aren't fools. We know when we're not being told the full story.
We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this.
It's the best country in the world.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent your views.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News,
the People's Channel,
Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon, it is 12 p.m. and you're watching the live desk here on GB News with Pip Thompson and Tom Harwood. Coming up this Friday lunchtime.
A roaring success for GB News' Don't Kill Cash campaign. The petition arrived in Downing Street yesterday with over 300,000 signatures. Hours later, the Treasury announced measures to protect cash. We'll have the very latest.
What's happened to Rishi Sunak's pledge to stop the boats? As latest figures reveal, nearly 25,000 people have crossed the Channel since he came to power last October. We're live outside number 10.
And brace yourselves for Storm Betty. More than half a month's rain could fall over the south of England today. Heavy, thundery downpours and strong winds. Where has the summer gone?
Plus, will you be able to toast England's women good luck in the World Cup at your local on Sunday morning? Probably not. But councils are being urged to get in the spirit and serve alcohol early. We'll be delving into all that, plus much more. Now, though, here's your headlines with Jeff Moody.
Good afternoon, it's 1 minute past 12. I'm Jeff Moody in the GB newsroom. Police in Northern Ireland have arrested a man in connection with the PSNI data breach. A 50-year-old man has been detained in County Londonderry under the Terrorism Act and is being questioned. Another man was arrested yesterday on suspicion of collecting information likely to be useful to terrorists. Last week, the details of 10,000 police officers and staff were published online by mistake, followed by a second breach relating to stolen documents and a laptop. Cash will remain accessible as part of a new plan set out by the Treasury. It comes after the GB News Don't Kill Cash petition, which attracted nearly 300,000 signatures, was delivered to Downing Street yesterday. A new framework will ensure that the vast majority of people will be no further than 3 miles away from being able to withdraw cash. Economic Secretary to the Treasury, Andrew Griffith, says it's good for vulnerable people.
Cash is important. It's here to stay for the long term. Many people, the elderly, the vulnerable, particularly rural communities, do depend on that access to cash. And if we want our shops to continue to take cash over the counter, then of course those businesses have got to have somewhere to deposit it. So the rules that we're announcing also cover the ability of businesses to deposit cash in a location that's convenient to them.
Well, the Shadow Schools Minister, Stephen Morgan, says he welcomes the news.
Thank you for running the petition, because I know it's the poorest in society that don't always get access to cash, and certainly in Portsmouth, where I represent, people have really struggled when banks have closed and cash machines have charged people. So I think it's a really important campaign, and I'm really pleased the government have listened.
Train drivers will strike on the 1st of September, and overtime will be banned the day after in a long-running dispute over pay. The strike will force train companies across England to cancel all services, while the ban on overtime will seriously disrupt the network. It will be the 12th one-day strike by ASLEF members since the dispute started over a year ago. GB News can reveal that almost 25,000 asylum seekers have crossed the English Channel since Rishi Sunak became Prime Minister. 24,971 migrants in small boats have made the crossing since October last year. That means 1 in 4 crossings since 2017 have happened whilst Mr Sunak has been in number 10. Stopping the boats is one of the government's 5 priorities. Sales in the retail sector fell faster than expected last month, according to the Office for National Statistics. Retail sales fell by 1.2% in July. That's worse than the 0.5% that economists forecast. The decline was attributed to bad weather and shoppers moving to online retailers, which meant 27.4% of retail sales took place online. That's the highest since February 22. Police in the US state of Georgia are investigating threats made against members of the jury who voted to charge Donald Trump with trying to overturn the 2020 presidential election result. The names and addresses of grand jury members were posted online by Mr. Trump's supporters. The former president was indicted for a 4th time on Monday for a suspected scheme to try to keep him in power. He denies any wrongdoing and remains the front runner to win the Republican presidential nomination for 2024. Cornwall Council and Devon and Cornwall Police will allow pubs and clubs across the country to open at 10 a.m. for the World Cup final this Sunday. The decision comes after Michael Gove wrote to councils across Britain requesting earlier opening times for fans to watch the match. Foreign Secretary James Cleverly and the Culture, Media and Sport Secretary Lucy Fraser will be representing the country at the match against Spain. England forward Alessio Russo says the team can't wait for the big day.
This is the biggest game, the one that you dream about, the one that means the most, but I feel like it will hit when we're in the tunnel and we're ready to walk out. And yeah, I think it's an incredible occasion. It's been an unbelievable tournament, and this is it. This is exactly where we want to be, and we can't wait.
None of us can wait. Well, this is GB News across the UK on TV, in your car, on digital radio, and on your smart speaker by saying play GB News. Now, though, it's back to Tom and Pip.
Jeff, thanks very much. GB News has helped save cash. Yep, the use of cash across the UK will stay protected as part of a new plan by the Treasury.
It's after GB News hand-delivered its Don't Kill Cash petition to Downing Street yesterday, when it had almost 300,000 signatures, although now it's got more than that. Under new laws to preserve paper money, banks will be fined unless cash is made available to customers within 3 miles of their homes, and just 1 mile for those in towns and cities.
We're joined by economics and business editor Liam Halligan, who you could just see there in the pictures in Downing Street, who can bring us the latest on the campaign. And it is a massive victory, this, isn't it? Endorsed by Andrew Griffith.
It is, particularly because, you know, regulatory eyebrows were cast in our direction when we launched this campaign. Now we've got, by far, the most important department in Whitehall, headed by the second most important person, powerful person in the country, name-checking us in the first sentence of their press release. It's a pretty important day. I can't remember, I've been in journalism 30 years, I can't remember the last time any broadcaster or newspaper had that kind of result so quickly. Let's have a look at what the Treasury actually said. Literally within minutes of us handing in our petition, which, as Tom said, has now got 305,000 people. But we need more, for reasons I'll explain. I hope we've got this graphic here. GB News has it spot on, said Andrew Griffiths, who is, of course, Economic Secretary to the Treasury. Access to cash is incredibly important to many. It's a choice we're going to protect. People shouldn't have to trek for hours to withdraw a tenner to put in someone's birthday card, nor should businesses have to travel large distances to deposit cash takings. Amen to that. That's why we are acting now to protect access to cash, says the Treasury, in law, and laying out that this means fee-free withdrawals and the availability of cash facilities within a reasonable distance. Now, that is, you know, if I'd written the press release myself, I'd find it hard to improve on that. But it is just a press release, and regulations and laws within financial services are quite often flouted. So it's very important that these new rules that the Treasury is signalling here are enacted, even if it's secondary legislation or additions to existing regulations. Above all, Pip, they must be enforced. Because, as I said, and I've said many times on this show, certain rules, particularly when you get down into the nitty-gritty of finance, are flouted until the regulators jump on the financial services industry and pull rank on them. And that often doesn't happen because civil servants, frankly, often don't have the bandwidth and the determination to challenge these huge vested interests.
And is it also very important that people keep using cash? Because if they don't, those distances at the moment, if cash use declines, could potentially be shortened?
I think people will use cash anyway because, you know, 10% of British households don't have regular access to the internet. There was a House of Lords report on the digital divide just a few weeks ago that came out because getting on for 2 million households in the UK don't even have a bank account. So, of course, they haven't got a smart card. So if you're not on the internet regularly and you haven't got a smart card, how are you going to live? How are you going to pay for anything? And I really think, you know, a lot of the media has been really sniffy a bit about this campaign because they live in London, and in London, you know, there are lots of trendy coffee bars. Oh, we don't spend time handling cash because we want to make your coffee lovely. No, you just don't want to incur the costs of handling cash, and you're making life a lot less convenient for some of your customers. Not, you know, not the well-heeled ones that use smartphones and smartwatches and chips in their arm or whatever. We're talking about ordinary Londoners who deal with cash. So I do think the use of cash will continue, and it's important that it does continue because we have enormous vested interests who don't want it to continue, and good journalism is about calling out those vested interests, and the vested interests include the banking sector, who doesn't want the hassle of cash. It includes big retailers who don't want the cash handling costs that the banks often impose on them, and it includes the tech giants who want to monitor everything that we spend online, and they want everything online so then they can monitor it even more and flog that information to marketing companies. And it includes also the big card payment companies, because once cash has gone, I mean, how much are they going to charge every small business owner, every taxi driver, every market stall trader, every busker for every single transaction? I know that some of them are currently charging more than the regulations allow them to. The regulations mean they should only be charging between 0.5% and 1%. Many of them are charging 4 or 5% for the reasons I said earlier. So we need more signatures. We need to keep the pressure on. We need to take a moment here to recognise what this means for GB News. But we also need to keep on cracking on, get this to 500,000 signatures, 1 million signatures, and push it in the face of the vested interests who want our campaign to fail.
No, it is remarkable, and it was... I did take a step back when I saw you five marching down Downing Street yesterday. Did you have...
Reservoir hacks.
Reservoir hacks. Did you have any inkling that the Treasury would respond quite so quickly? They must have known, they must have sensed the people power behind this petition.
Without lifting the lid on some of the mechanics of journalism, Tom, yeah, I knew, because I've been in touch with a lot of the people who decide. It's my job to talk to these people and to say on camera and on air what I can about those conversations. But you're a seasoned journalist, you're a seasoned journalist. The way our trade works, and it is a trade, is you can't always say everything you know as soon as you know it, because you're trying to use what you know to lever out more information. Now, a lot of people who don't understand journalism will say that's outrageous. This is what we do. Serious journalists try and get information out of powerful people and publicise it if they think that's in the public interest. They try and hold powerful vested interests to account with ideas and guile and sort of, you know, a burning desire to try and make things fairer. Here at GB News, we know, because we get so many emails, I get so many people on Twitter, they need cash to survive. Small businesses need cash to survive. People want to use cash because they have worries about freedom and surveillance, capitalism. Cash is really, really important, in particular to vulnerable households, not least the elderly. For all these reasons, we've launched this campaign. We've had an early success here, albeit a fantastic success. I'm proud of all of us. I'm proud of Jeff Marsh, Dan Falvey, the digital team, who have really headlined on this. They weren't at Downing Street. It was us gobby people on screen who were. But a lot of people behind the scenes at GB News have done a fabulous job here. We've got to build on this success, get more signatures, keep this in the public eye and close to the top of the political agenda.
Well, Liam, thank you so much, and no doubt we'll be speaking to you more about this issue as those signatures continue to grow. The website is still live, gbnews.com/cash.
Yeah, great work, Liam. GB News reporters Jack Carson is in Birmingham and Will Hollis is in Nottingham, and they've been finding out how the campaign is affecting people around the country. So let's start with Will Hollis in Nottingham. Will, what have people been telling you?
Well, right where I'm standing, there are about 3 banks within maybe 10, 20 metres. Of course, Nottingham is the biggest city here in the East Midlands, of around 300,000 people living in the city centre and just around its periphery. But when we've been doing this story, we've often been going to places that are off of the big routes where maybe there's a smaller population. One of the places that I went to while doing this story was a place called Market Deeping of only 7,000 people, where they don't have any banks whatsoever. And it's the same story across the country, where banks are slowly being closed. And when banks are closed, of course, there are no cash machines, so that means particularly for businesses that run cash only, there's nowhere for them to deposit their cash. Now, one of those businesses here in Nottingham that does run cash only is the High Street Flour Barrow. It's just behind me, you can see it in the background. It's run by a lady called Annette. She does run only cash. She says that one of the ways that she does that, one of the reasons that she does that for is because it means that she can be competitive. And she was telling me a little bit about it earlier this morning.
I think it's fantastic, and I think it's brilliant that people take on the government in something that they're passionate about. The older generation, they're not brought up with credit, they're brought up with cash only. They're brought up to pay their bills in cash. They don't understand all this online banking. So if we have a card-controlled society, then we have no banks, we have no need for banks. So where do we go from there?
Well, in being a cash-only business, it means that Annette and the other traders around where I am in Nottingham today can be competitive with the supermarkets particularly. Annette was telling me that she can sell a bunch of flowers for £5 maximum. They would be £10 in a local supermarket, so she can be competitive when in other ways supermarkets can be a lot more competitive than the average trader. So a lot of businesses here in Nottingham, even in a place where there are a lot of places that are card only now, are trying to keep cash as part of our tender because the customers that come to use their stalls rely on it and they love using it because of the protections that it gives them and the freedom as well.
Well, Will, thank you very much for bringing us that from a slightly, well, at least it's not wet in Nottingham, because we're going to cross over to Birmingham now, where Jack Carson is standing with a frightfully prim and proper GB News umbrella. Let's get the views of slightly more wet Birmingham now.
Yeah, so I've been speaking to those people today. Birmingham as a young city is always going to be an interesting one when you ask them about cash, because of course so many people here just double tap their screen or the side button on their phones and they've got their card up available to tap on a contactless. I've met numerous people today that just say, well, I just carry my contactless card around. But of course this decision by the Treasury to enable the Financial Conduct Authority the powers to fine banks if they don't allow that access to cash, of course, if they don't allow those free transactions when it comes to cash, is something that they do also still agree with. In the UK, from around the 50,000 cash machines around the UK, 78% of them only do free withdrawals. So there's still 22% there that you have to pay a withdrawal fee for to get cash. The Unite Union reckon that since 2015, 6,000 banks across the country have closed. So that was making that access to cash, as Will was saying, in some of the more rural parts of the country, more of an issue. But on that idea of a possible cashless society in the future, I've asked the people of Birmingham what they think.
I think it's a good idea. I think there will always be a place for cash. I mean, for instance, there's elderly people who don't really have access to the internet, don't really know how to use mobile phones.
I only use contactless on my phone nowadays. I never take cash out at all because it's so much easier.
Well, it's actually phone now. There's no card at all. I don't even use cash. I haven't used cash for probably over 6 months, and everything's actually just all pinged with my phone. It's totally convenience. You just go along to a shop and just get your phone out and just ping and it's away you go. I don't have to go to a cash point. I don't have to worry about any card theft or anything like that. So it just kind of it's totally.
Yeah, that convenience really the issue that's come up many times as to why people are choosing maybe not to go for cash. But as you heard there, the fact is some people just can't imagine a society without cash, without the ability to say pay for something with a nice crisp £10 note. And this decision from the Treasury to protect it going forward has gone down well here in Birmingham.
Well, Jack, thank you very much for bringing us the news there from Birmingham, and Will Hollis, of course, from Nottingham as well. Really interesting to get the views of people around the country on this.
And when we talk about using cards, I have this issue where, you know, when you use your card so many times, you then have to put it in the machine. Then you have to remember what your PIN number is.
Oh, see, I don't have that problem. I pay for everything with my watch.
My brain's like a sieve, so... Oh, well...
I just tap... Apart from... Actually, no, I tell a lie. I used cash yesterday.
Yeah, but
I got a haircut.
so modern, Tom. So modern.
But, yeah, I mean, there is something slightly futuristic about since I got the watch, just tapping it like that.
Yeah. I do still feel that I love the feel of just proper notes in your pocket. Well, stay with us here on GB News, because we will be revealing how many people have crossed the channel since Rishi Sunak became Prime Minister. Is he failing in one of his key pledges? We'll have the latest from Downing Street.
That warm feeling inside. From Boxed Boilers, proud sponsors of weather on GB News.
Hi there, it's Aidan McGivern here from the Met Office with the GB News forecast. Low pressure is arriving overnight, increasingly strong winds ahead of it, heavy rain as well, and the risk of thunderstorms, especially for eastern parts of England during the early hours of Saturday. Here's the low that's approaching, developing quickly. That's going to bring strengthening winds both ahead and during the period in which that low pressure crosses the UK. But before the low arrives, actually, showery rain pushes north, easing for a time, drier conditions for Scotland, northeast England and southern parts for a time. Some sunshine coming through, but a lot of cloud, and with the breeze as well, it's not going to feel particularly hot. 23, 24 Celsius, albeit with increased humidity. Then the low pushes in. Very strong winds developing across western parts. Gales through Irish Sea coast in particular, and West Wales at the southwest of England seeing the strongest winds during the evening. During the early hours, we're going to see thunderstorms develop across eastern parts of England, heavy rain pushing into Scotland and Northern Ireland, sweeping through elsewhere, and a very warm night to come, 17, 18 Celsius. So a blustery start to the weekend. The heavy and persistent rain pushes into Scotland, Northern Ireland and northwest England. For the rest of England and Wales, it's a mixture of sunny spells and showers. Most of the showers will be across western England and Wales. Drier and brighter for southeast England, and still warm, particularly where the sun is shining.
That warm feeling inside. From boxed boilers. Proud sponsors of weather on GB News.
What you get for breakfast is something that, if we do our jobs right, you will wake up to news that you didn't know the night before.
It's a conversation. It's not just me and Eamon.
We want to get to know you, and we want you to get to know us.
From 6, it's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Monday to Thursdays on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Mondays to Thursdays on Farage, here on GB News. We will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
When the news happens, it happens here.
And really important breaking news.
Breaking news this morning.
On TV, radio and online, the news starts here on Britain's Newsroom.
All the biggest stories and the answers that you need from across the UK and beyond.
Join Britain's Newsroom from 9:30 on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Patrick Christie's, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
People in Britain, they love free speech, but they also love fair play.
I don't care if I'm speaking somebody from a trade union, from the Labour Party, somebody from the SNP. And I think the viewers like to see that actually we can challenge one another, but in a positive way.
We think we ask the questions that people want to ask, and often we ask the questions that we wanted to ask in Parliament but never got the chance to ask.
So join us every Saturday, 10 a.m. till noon on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Hi, I'm Dan Wootton. You can watch me live on GB News Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. And did you know that you can also watch and listen live on our website, gbnews.com. You'll always be up to date on the latest breaking news, as well as enjoying the best stories, opinions and shows. You can even join the debate under our live player as you're watching. So head straight to gbnews.com on TV, radio and online. GB News, Britain's news channel.
It's all about family, being in people's living rooms, all the interaction and getting to know who our viewers and listeners are.
When I was young, my dad used to say, nah, stop arguing. I wanted an outlet that would enable me to give my opinion.
People are going through a really hard time right now, and I know that you don't feel like you're being listened to by the establishment.
I came to GB News because it's the People's Channel, and I want the audience to have their say on the events of the day.
We're dynamic. We do something different. Democracy shows that the wisdom of the nation is in its people.
I get to travel to find out what the story is from a personal perspective.
The British people aren't fools. We know when we're not being told the full story.
We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this.
It's the best country in the world.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent your views.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News,
the People's Channel,
Britain's news channel.
Hello, welcome back to the live desk on GB News. Now to some breaking news, because we can exclusively reveal the number of migrants who've crossed the Channel since Rishi Sunak became Prime Minister. Remember, this Prime Minister has pledged to stop the boats. That number has now passed 25,000.
Yes, indeed. And it's 25,000 since the Prime Minister became Prime Minister just 9 months ago. Let's cross to our political editor, Chris Hope, who's live in Downing Street. Chris, what does this number mean?
It's a big number, Tom. You remember last week we had 100,000 people have come across the Channel over the past 5 years. Well, now today's figure is interesting. It's on Rishi Sunak's watch. So since he became Prime Minister at the end of October last year, we can reveal that more than 25,000 people have crossed the Channel and come into this country. And that is an indication of the scale of the problem facing the Prime Minister. You'll remember back in January, of course, how the PM set out 5 targets for the year. One of them was stopping the boats. Of course, that wasn't a time-limited idea. It was what he'd focused on this 12-month period. It shows how hard it has been for him to get to grips with the problem, not least because judges are frustrating the Rwanda angle, taking people who arrive here illegally to Rwanda for processing. That's in the hands of the courts for another 4 months, I understand. And this number will get bigger and bigger, but it's crucially on Rishi Sunak's watch. This is happening, no one else.
Christopher, does the former French ambassador sum this up? Sylvia Berman, she's been speaking today, and she said that the Prime Minister's pledge is totally delusionary.
Well, there's a problem, of course. We know the geography of the south coast of England. It's long. There's lots of ways across there. Before the COVID pandemic, more people tried to get across to the UK on the Channel Tunnel route. That was cut off. It's much harder to secure a long border. We're trying to work with the French as a country. The government has spent hundreds of millions of pounds giving it to the French to try and pick up more people on the beaches. But the figures out today in the newspapers showing that actually it seems that fewer migrants are being collected from the beaches, despite this attempt at more cross-party working. I should say on the official figures released just this morning were 24,972, up 112 overnight. But the figure we're revealing right now is a new boat docking in Dover port this lunchtime from our producer down in Dover. The Border Force Ranger is docking right now with expected to be more than 28 migrants on board. And that's why this figure, a figure which will not be celebrated in any sense in the building behind me, of 25,000 migrants coming across the Channel into the UK while Rishi Sunak was Prime Minister.
Pretty extraordinary that that's another boat today, even despite not particularly clear conditions in the Channel today. It does seem that this is getting worse and worse. But to zero in on what is going on the French side of the Channel, after £480 million has been spent of British taxpayers' money trying to get those French patrols more frequent, more regular, more successful, it doesn't appear to be working.
Yeah, the government wants it to work. I'm sure the French want it to work. It's a long border. It's difficult. There's obviously there's international waters when the boats go across. What do? Do you repatriate them? We've left the European Union. We're trying to find new ways to try and to ensure that people stay when they first arrive and claim asylum. It is challenging. There's no question, but it's something which the PM has said he will sort out. He will stop the boats. Again, Tom, as you know, he didn't say when that would happen. Merely he would stop the boat. So we're waiting to see what that means. I mean, there could be an election this time next year. What he'll want, though, is that number to start coming down. It has been coming down, of course, the government would say if they were here now. They've dealt with the Albanian route. That was a problem. It is coming down. But still, 25,000 here in I think it's the 10 short months. Is it 10? 8 months that the PM has been in charge. It's a lot of people. 1 in 4 new arrivals in the past 5 years, while Mr. Sunak has been in number 10 Downing Street. It's his problem, but it's his priority. We're right to challenge him. He made it his priority back in January.
Does Labour have a point when they say that, you know, the government or Rishi Sunak has just been chasing headlines about this and coming up with the Stop the Boats pledge? Really, should it not have been about clearing the backlog?
Yes, I mean, the fact that boats are coming here is a symptom of a wider problem, and Labour would definitely say when they get into power, if they get into power next year, they would look to clear that backlog, put more resource into the Home Office, work more closely with law enforcement agencies on the continent, which the government would say, all of which it's trying to do. The difference is this Rwanda plan is still stuck in the courts. I mean, and don't forget, of course, net migration is much bigger, and that's people who arrive here legally. That's hundreds of millions, hundreds of thousands a year, I should say. And it's almost this issue on the South Coast is a symptom of a wider problem. But Labour think they've got a problem, an answer to this problem. We'll know soon enough if they win power next year.
OK, political editor Christopher Hope, thanks very much for that. Good to see all the support for England's women outside number 10 there.
Yeah, bunting went up yesterday.
We'll be talking about all that shortly. But coming up...
Yes, could the dreaded 8 a.m. scramble for a GP appointment soon be a thing of the past? Before that, Jeff Moody is here with the headlines.
It's 12:31. I'm Jeff Moody in the GB newsroom. GB News can reveal that more than 25,000 asylum seekers have now crossed the English Channel since Rishi Sunak became Prime Minister. It comes as the Border Force vessel Ranger has picked up dozens of people from a small boat in the Channel this lunchtime. 1 in 4 crossings since 2017 have taken place whilst Mr Sunak has been in number 10. Stopping the boats is one of the government's 5 priorities. Train drivers will strike on the 1st of September and overtime will be banned the day after in a long-running dispute over pay. The industrial action will force train companies across England to cancel all services, while the ban on overtime will seriously disrupt the network. It will be the 12th one-day strike by ASLEF members since the dispute started over a year ago. Police in Northern Ireland have arrested a man in connection to the PSNI data breach. A 50-year-old man has been detained in County Londonderry under the Terrorism Act and is being questioned. Another man was arrested yesterday on suspicion of collecting information likely to be useful to terrorists. Last week, the details of 10,000 police officers and staff were published online by mistake, followed by a second breach relating to stolen documents and a laptop. Devon and Cornwall police have said they will turn a blind eye to pubs and clubs who open earlier for the World Cup final this Sunday. The decision comes after Michael Gove wrote to councils across Britain requesting earlier opening times to watch the match. Well, Foreign Secretary James Cleverly and the Culture, Media and Sports Secretary Lucy Fraser will be representing the country at the match against Spain on Sunday. Now, you can get more of all of those stories by visiting our website, gbnews.com.
The Live Desk with me, Mark Longhurst.
And me, Pip Thompson. It's here Monday to Friday on GB News.
From midday, we'll bring you the news as it breaks, whenever it's happening and wherever it's happening, from across the UK and around the world.
Refreshing, feisty, but with a bit of fun too.
If it matters to you, we'll have it covered on TV, radio and online.
Join the Live Desk on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Weeknights on GB News from 6 p.m. You'll always get drama.
Please stop, Michelle. I know, yeah. Please stop.
Should I just shut up? Romance.
You like me, I like you. There you go.
There you are. Well, don't tell anybody.
Adventure.
Etc.
That's the whole point. But
and action.
Sergeant, read my superstar panel that already at it. That fighting is going to be quite a show.
Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
So Jubes and Co, we tackle the issues of the day with real robust debate, both sides of the fence, battling it out with me in the middle with my forthright opinions and views. And often really interesting things happen because you start with a position and then by the end of the debate you find actually, well, I might not have thought about that one.
What we need in this country is 2 new political parties.
You should maybe think about doing a 2024 calendar. I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm keeping you company right through until 7 o'clock this evening. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's watching.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton. I'll bring you the sharpest takes and hottest debates.
Do you not believe in prisons? I don't believe in prisons.
I'm completely stunned. I guarantee you there'll be no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I actually was personally quite offended by it.
And no reason to go to bed.
So I guess they've always been quite woke.
That's Dan Wootton tonight on TV, radio and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News. The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
In a world of dull and predictable radio and TV shows.
Oh, hi. On Mark Dolan tonight, we've got big guests. We drill into the big stories of the day. The show adds up to a brilliant listening and viewing experience. Mark Dolan Tonight is the most entertaining current affairs show ever, and that's a fact. That's Mark Dolan Tonight, Friday, Saturday and Sunday from 9. Only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Like all families, we have arguments every now and then, but actually we agree on what the mission of GB News is, and that's the most fundamentally important thing.
GB News provides the kind of platform that lets all voices be heard.
We don't hold back. We're free to say what we really think. Just because some people who live in a tiny little Westminster bubble think that their particular story is important, that's not the most important story for me.
And often they will be difficult stories, stories that you won't find on the establishment media.
Because what people think in the north of England may be very different to what they're thinking in the home counties.
We're going to carry on telling the world what life is really like for households up and down the UK.
We love to be in your car, in your kitchen as you're having your breakfast. Whatever you're doing, you are part of the show. If it matters to you, it matters to us.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News,
The People's Channel,
Britain's news channel.
Welcome back to the live desk on GB News. If you have ever queued on your phone, which I bet you have, to your GP at 11 o'clock... 11 o'clock? 8 o'clock! It could have been 11 o'clock, but I'm sure there was a much longer wait at 8 o'clock in the morning. Then this could be music to your ears.
Yes, GP surgeries in England will bring in digital phone systems by the spring in a bid to end that early morning scramble to get an appointment.
Backed by £240 million from the government, more than 1,000 practices have signed up for the upgrade, which will come into force in March.
Well, let's get more on this and exactly how it might work. Let's get the details from our political correspondent, Olivia Utley, who is in Westminster. And Olivia, am I having a bit of amnesia here, or have I heard this announcement from the government before?
We have heard a very similar announcement from the government before. This would be a pretty politically savvy move, which is why the government is so keen on trying to make it work. It costs £240 million, which in the grand scheme of things is a drop in the ocean. And we know that the public really, really hate that 8 a.m. rush to get an appointment with their GP. What happens is, I'm sure most of our viewers are well acquainted with this process, but you call the GP, you get a very, very long, engaged tone, and then finally, you might get through to a receptionist who will probably say, sorry, we've got no appointments, call back another day. How this plan will work is the government is moving all GPs onto a digital system. So instead of getting that engaged tone, customers will be told that how long they have to wait. It'll be more like calling a private company and it'll say, you know, you're 13th in the queue and you've got 25 minutes to wait. Another part of the plan, which is really important, is that once the patient gets through to their GP surgery, after they've had that wait and been told how long that wait is going to be, then receptionists will be urged either to give them an appointment that day if their concern is urgent, or to give them an appointment in 2 weeks. And part of this £240 million budget will go on training receptionists to be care navigators. Now, again, that's a plan that we've heard before and never quite come to fruition. But the idea behind it is that receptionists, instead of just being there to sort of field your call onto a doctor, will be able to tell you whether the doctor is the person you need to see, or whether you could dial 111, for example, or see a pharmacist instead. So it's a pretty big shake-up of the GP system. And as you said in your introduction there, will be music to the ears of people who are really, really sick of that 8 a.m. scramble. What the Prime Minister is probably hoping is that it's a pretty easy electoral win for him for not very much money.
One of the concerns about this, Olivia, does seem to be that, OK, people might be able to get on the phone quicker, but there's still not enough GPs to actually give them that appointment. So it's a bit of a bottleneck effect, if you like.
Well, exactly. What some doctors are saying is that the bottleneck will just be moved down the line. So instead of having a bottleneck when you call the GP, you'll get through that process quite easily. But then without more GPs in the surgeries, then there will be a bottleneck when people are trying to get their appointments. Another issue is that the quality of these digital services might differ. So there are plenty of GPs who are on digital telephony service at the moment, but it isn't particularly effective or up to date. So it might not be the sort of blanket solution that people are hoping for. It also, for some of the surgeries which are on really, really old systems, this upgrade of the phone system will cost about £60,000 per surgery. Now, that is quite a lot of money, and people will expect it to make a pretty big difference. Ultimately, the issue is, without more GPs, this can't really be a silver bullet.
OK. Political correspondent Olivia Utley speaking to us from Westminster. Thank you.
Gosh, I don't think it's going to be all that big of an improvement if I'm just told... The number of times I've phoned a private company and I'm told I'm number 27th in the queue, wait 4 hours. I mean, my goodness.
Yeah, and many of us, like me, don't have any patience at all.
No, slammed out, especially at 8 a.m. You know, you need to get to work, you need to go places. You can't be sitting waiting in a queue. Anyway, productivity in this country. Let's move on now, because a GBNews investigation has revealed that controversial claims and associations of a reparations activist who has links to a parliamentary group and spoke at an event alongside a Labour MP. Charlie Peters has this exclusive report.
We have a right to be here, not because of being British. We were here before you. We were here before them, but we have a right to be here because of everything that Britain has stolen from us.
Black Britons need to claim land wherever they are. That's according to Esther Stanford-Coze, an activist who helped launch a parliamentary group on reparations for slavery and colonialism.
So we have to claim land wherever we are.
Stanford-Coze said Black Britons had special rights because of colonialism and that African heritage people were in Britain first.
The activist's charged comments in this South London square were not a rare outburst. We've also seen her making charged claims in online talks.
At a panel discussion, she lamented the corporate white stream media.
These are not the ones that often get promoted, and certainly not the ones that the corporate white stream media are amplifying.
Stanford-Coze has also claimed that parts of the Black Rights Movement have links to the CIA and British intelligence agencies.
This is obviously a good thing, but if you don't realise that it's part of an agenda that involves CIA, MI5, MI6, and some of us know it very well, OK? That's all I can really say on this platform.
She also made air finger quotes while saying that Jews were the most oppressed people on earth. Other panellists at the event broadcast earlier this year made extraordinary comments that Stanford-Coze did not challenge. One speaker quoted biblical scripture that said that Jews belonged to the synagogue of Satan.
The scripture says they say they are Jews, but they are not Jews. And God says, I will make them of the synagogue of Satan.
Warren Alexander Dean, who campaigns for a special currency for black businesses, made controversial remarks about gay men.
This homosexuality thing is part of the black genocide agenda.
Labour MP Belle Ribeiro Addy, who spoke alongside Stanford-Coze in Brixton and who chairs the parliamentary group, asked the Prime Minister to pledge reparations earlier this year. He said no. Alka Segal Cuthbert, from the campaign group Don't Divide Us, said this was the right move.
The far more worrying problem is the political irresponsibility shown by APPG when they take these ideas seriously, because these are ideas that are frankly reintroducing racialised thinking into British society, that it's establishing legitimacy for seeing everything through a racialised lens, and absolutely no good can come of this at all. It's extremely divisive. It sets up not only divisions between black and white citizens, but it also kind of inculcates a hierarchy of oppressions amongst ethnic minorities themselves.
Stanford Kosey is no longer the public inquiry point for the APPG. But Bel Ribeiro Addy still spoke alongside her at the event earlier this month in Brixton. Many will today be asking, why are MPs associating with an activist who makes these claims and has these controversial associations? Charlie Peters, GB News, Brixton.
And the reporter behind that extraordinary investigation joins us in the studio now. Charlie Peters, just listening to some of those quotes, that gay people are about black genocide, that Jews are satanic, that there should be a separate currency for black people. How did these individuals become associated with with an all-party parliamentary group?
So that was taken from a talk given where the public inquiry points for this APPG on African reparations, Stanford Kosey, was attending and was a speaker. She failed to challenge any of those remarks while she was live. In fact, the host for that event said, "Thank you, my brother," when Mr. Warren Davies said the black genocide agenda. So some of those remarks were actually welcomed by the people organising this talk. And I think the really concerning point we have here, of course, is that these people have links into Parliament now. And, you know, Stanford Kosey, she stood down as the public inquiry point at the beginning of this year, at least January 2023, we think. But in November 2021, she helped to launch this APPG, had a direct link into Parliament through that work, and, as we saw, was recently stood on a platform with Bel Ribeiro Addy, the Labour MP for Streatham. So this is a connection which is ongoing.
And have you had replies from these individuals after your investigation?
Well, we reached out to everyone involved, everyone on the APPG, and we didn't hear back from them. One person who we thought might get back to us, Sir Peter Bottomley, he's the Conservative MP on the APPG.
That makes it an APPG. Without him, there would be no APPG.
He's the government sponsor, and I think what's really interesting for the government as it carries out this supposed, war on woke. Rishi Sunak last year talking about how he wants to tackle woke nonsense. Here he has MPs in his own party supporting this APPG on reparations, on dealing with the legacy of colonialism and slavery. Very controversial topics, which I think many Tory MPs don't believe should be at the forefront of their work. And also there are problems here for Keir Starmer, of course, because Bel Ribeiro Addy and a few other Labour MPs on that APPG being associated with these kind of speakers. Mr Starmer obviously has been on a sort of a clear-up of the party since he took office. Bel Ribeiro Addy was the Shadow Minister for Immigration very briefly when he started, and he removed her. But clearly there are still some concerns with some MPs and their links to very controversial and sometimes often extremist speakers.
No, it's absolutely fascinating. Looking at these particular sentences that were uttered, is there any indication that Bel Ribeiro Addy is aware of the associations that she is with, that she knows that the people she associates with also associate with all of these unpalatable views?
Well, I brought to her office every single quote listed, both in that news package, but also there were several others that we couldn't fit into that short report. There were so many disturbing things said. So her office must be aware of them, and I phoned up to chase, and a staffer for the MP said that they had no information for me at this time.
And when we look at that footage, they do seem to have quite a number of supporters there.
So I think the most worrying thing about this, not just the links into Parliament, but also how many people let this stuff be consumed and accepted in wider society. I mean, that talk that we heard earlier where African heritage people were said to be here first and they had special rights and they needed to claim land wherever they are. Really extremist language. It was delivered in the middle of South London in Windrush Square in Brixton. And there was no booing. In fact, there was an enormous amount of cheering. So really quite pugnacious and sharp language.
Well, it's fascinating. Absolutely fascinating. It might be something that you'll come back to us with more information on.
I hope so.
Follow up, yeah.
We'll certainly follow that one.
Yeah, well, if Bel Ribeiro Addy, if you're watching, Bel, please do get in touch. We'd like to hear from you. We'd like to hear any sort of explanation. But no doubt, Charlie, if their office does get in touch, be right here to us.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Thanks, Charlie. Now, the weather. Have you looked outside today? Have you been outside today? We saw it with Jack in Birmingham standing there under a huge GB News umbrella. Doesn't feel at all like summer, does it? Although it is still supposed to be. It is very wet in many parts of England, seeing a month's worth of rain in some places within hours.
Yes, a yellow weather warning has already been issued for thunderstorms in London and southern and eastern England and across the Midlands too. The Met Office is warning of travel disruptions, power cuts and flooding. It's as if we're in the middle of winter. Although perhaps some people in the north, and particularly the northwest, will be thinking, about time you in the south got some of this too. We've been putting up with it. Well, let's get more of this with the weather journalist Nathan Rao.
Hello.
Hello. I mean, what is going on?
How can the promise of a lovely weekend go so horribly wrong so quickly? But it has. I mean, you know, we were talking about getting the barbecues and sun cream out. Yeah. Put them away again. Put them back away. We were talking about the weather warnings, so we've replaced what could have been a nice sunny weekend with a splattering of weather warnings from the Met Office for the next 24 hours, really. And that is for rain in Northern Ireland until 6 a.m. tomorrow and in Northern Britain until midday tomorrow. That's for rain. Thunderstorms across London, Kent, Anglia, Brighton until, that's from 8 p.m. today until 5 a.m. tomorrow. Wind down the west coast until midday tomorrow with gusts of up to 70 miles per hour. There you go.
I'm not sure whether these are today pictures, but it looks pretty lively.
Yeah, I mean, look at that. That's what we're going to get. That's what's replaced the sunshine. And this is to do with two things. Storm Betty has been named by Met Éireann to come in overnight tonight. That is the second named storm of the season, following Storm Anthony, second in the same amount of weeks. And we have a Spanish plume. Now, this was going... this is what we were, a Spanish plume. This is a plume of warm air that we were hoping was going to bring us the lovely warm weather this weekend with the high pressure. But what we've got is low pressure now coming in more strongly in the form of Storm Betty from the west. Low pressure will move under the warm air, lifting it up. This is the combination that causes a Spanish plume. And when you lift warm air up, you get instability and rain and thunder and hail and wind and all the things that we're going to get this weekend.
So this is all Betty's fault?
Well, you know, let's not blame Betty entirely. I mean, Betty has sort of rolled in a bit earlier than we'd expect. We're still in summer, and I think our storm season has cranked up a bit earlier than we would expect. We're getting a lot of Atlantic activity now that we might expect to see in sort of September and that sort of thing.
So on Sunday morning, if people want to watch the football, you know, in the pub garden, in their garden, what are the chances of that?
Well, do you know what? That is 2 days away, and I have to say I sit here with a horrible track record of giving you that. So I dare say Storm Betty is going to move in tonight up through northern Britain, and it should clear by the end of tomorrow, leaving a mixture of sunshine and showers. Now, the north of the country is going to be more wet and windy, more prolonged through the weekend, and the south is always going to get the warmer conditions and the brighter sunshine. But as you can see, it just turns. So really, I should keep my mouth shut.
But so as soon as this storm goes, because you were saying last week about these sort of twin cycles of pushing all of this warm air up. Will they still be there doing that once the storm has gone?
Well, this is pretty much what's happened. So we had a sort of a battleground going on with high pressure to the east of the UK. High pressure always, as I always say, good news in summer, clear skies, warm weather. Low pressure, which rolls in from the Atlantic from the west. And it sort of caused a little bit of a battle. Now, the outcome of this could have been that it would cause a funnel of warm air coming up from the south, and we get a little bit of ridge of high pressure that will cause some nice sunshine and showers and sunshine and blue skies. What has actually happened is Betty has nudged right in, and we're getting a really low pressure dominated pattern really from now into the start of into the start of the weekend, and that is bringing the wet and windy weather. So it's not changed. It's just, I think I did actually mention in my own mitigation that, you know, when these battles go on, it can be a very unpredictable picture. And even the Met Office was saying last week, you know, there's some warm weather coming. And there is some warm weather in terms of warm temperatures, humidity coming up, but the lovely blue skies, sunshine, high pressure driven weather that we love, forget it.
People do need to watch how they go, though, don't they? If they're driving in a car, that's the surface water. It can be dicey. And even if you're walking down, as happened to me, if you're walking down the street, stick to the far side of the curb, otherwise you're likely to get drenched.
And this is actually why the Met Office put these warnings out for disruption and heavy rain in a short period of time.
Nathan, as always, thank you so much for bringing us such wonderful, delightful, happy news about the British summer. That's it for now on the live desk, but we are back in a couple of minutes' time with much more to talk to you about. See you shortly.
The temperature's rising. Boxed Solar, proud sponsors of weather on GB News.
Hi there, it's Aidan McGivern here from the Met Office with the GB News forecast. Low pressure is arriving overnight, increasingly strong winds ahead of it, heavy rain as well, and the risk of thunderstorms, especially for eastern parts of England during the early hours of Saturday. Here's the low that's approaching, developing quickly. That's going to bring strengthening winds both ahead and during the period in which that low pressure crosses the UK. But before the low arrives, actually, showery rain pushes north, easing for a time, drier conditions for Scotland, northeast England and southern parts for a time. Some sunshine coming through, but a lot of cloud, and with the breeze as well, it's not going to feel particularly hot. 23, 24 Celsius, albeit with increased humidity. Then the low pushes in. Very strong winds developing across western parts. Gales through Irish Sea coast in particular, and West Wales at the southwest of England seeing the strongest winds during the evening. During the early hours, we're going to see thunderstorms develop across eastern parts of England, heavy rain pushing into Scotland and Northern Ireland, sweeping through elsewhere, and a very warm night to come, 17, 18 Celsius. So a blustery start to the weekend. The heavy and persistent rain pushes into Scotland, Northern Ireland and northwest England. For the rest of England and Wales, it's a mixture of sunny spells and showers. Most of the showers will be across western England and Wales. Drier and brighter for southeast England, and still warm, particularly where the sun is shining.
The temperature's rising. Boxed Solar, proud sponsors of weather on GB News.
What you get for breakfast is something that, if we do our jobs right, you will wake up to news that you didn't know the night before.
It's a conversation. It's not just me and Eamon.
We want to get to know you, and we want you to get to know us.
From 6, it's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Monday to Thursdays on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Mondays to Thursdays on Farage, here on GB News. We will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
When the news happens, it happens here.
And really important breaking news.
Breaking news this morning.
On TV, radio and online, the news starts here on Britain's Newsroom.
All the biggest stories and the answers that you need from across the UK and beyond.
Join Britain's Newsroom from 9:30 on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Patrick Christie's Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
People in Britain, they love free speech, but they also love fair play.
I don't care if I'm speaking somebody from a trade union, from the Labour Party, somebody from the SNP. And I think the viewers like to see that actually we can challenge one another, but in a positive way.
We think we ask the questions that people want to ask, and often we ask the questions that we wanted to ask in Parliament but never got the chance to ask.
So join us every Saturday, 10 a.m. till noon on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Hi, I'm Dan Wootton. You can watch me live on GB News Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. And did you know that you can also watch and listen live on our website, gbnews.com? You'll always be up to date on the latest breaking news, as well as enjoying the best stories, opinions and shows. You can even join the debate under our live player as you're watching. So head straight to gbnews.com on TV, radio and online. GB News, Britain's news channel.
It's all about family, being in people's living rooms, all the interaction and getting to know who our viewers and listeners are.
When I was young, my dad used to say, Nana, stop arguing. I wanted an outlet that would enable me to give my opinion.
People are going through a really hard time right now, and I know that you don't feel like you're being listened to by the establishment.
I came to GB News because it's the People's Channel, and I want the audience to have their say on the events of the day.
We're dynamic. We do something different. Democracy shows that the wisdom of the nation is in its people.
I get to travel to find out what the story is from a personal perspective.
The British people aren't fools. We know when we're not being told the full story.
We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this.
It's the best country in the world.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent your views.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News,
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon, it is 1 o'clock and you're watching the live desk here on GB News with Pip Thompson and Tom Harwood. Coming up this Friday lunchtime.
GB News helps save cash. The Treasury announces measures to protect cash just hours after our petition was delivered to Downing Street. But what will it mean for you?
Is Rishi Sunak failing on his pledge to stop the boats? GB News has revealed the number of migrants who've crossed the Channel since he became Prime Minister has now passed 25,000.
And it'll all be eyes on the Lionesses this Sunday. So should pubs be able to serve alcohol earlier to celebrate the World Cup final?
Yeah, we will be talking about that and so much more. But first of all, let's get all your headlines with Jeff Moody.
Hello, it's 1:01. I'm Jeff Moody in the GB newsroom. GB News can reveal that more than 25,000 migrants have crossed the English Channel since Rishi Sunak became Prime Minister. The figure was reached just after midday today, after the Border Force vessel Ranger arrived at Dover Harbour with 57 people on board. That means 1 in 4 crossings since 2018 have happened whilst Mr Sunak has been in number 10, while stopping the boats is one of the government's 5 priorities. Police in Northern Ireland have arrested a man in connection with the PSNI data breach. A 50-year-old man has been detained in County Londonderry under the Terrorism Act and is being questioned. Another man was arrested yesterday on suspicion of collecting information likely to be useful to terrorists. Last week, the details of 10,000 police officers and staff were published online by mistake, followed by a second breach relating to stolen documents and a laptop. Well, it comes as a PSNI officer's laptop and notebook were lost from a moving vehicle. The service says the laptop was deactivated and has been recovered, but sections of the notebook remain missing. The contents of the book are, at this stage, unclear. Now, train drivers will strike on the 1st of September and overtime will be banned the day after in a long-running dispute over pay. The strike will force train companies across England to cancel all services, while the ban on overtime will seriously disrupt the network. It will be the 12th one-day strike by ASLEF members since the dispute started over a year ago. Metropolitan Police say nearly 300 crimes related to London's ultra-low emission zone have been recorded. A group opposed to ULEZ expansion has been targeting the enforcement cameras, cutting wires or removing them completely. Close to 3,000 cameras are being installed across the capital ahead of the scheme's rollout at the end of the month. Now, cash will remain accessible as part of a new plan set out by the Treasury. It comes after the GB News Don't Kill Cash petition, which attracted nearly 300,000 signatures, was delivered to Downing Street yesterday. A new framework will ensure that the vast majority of people will be no further than 3 miles away from being able to withdraw cash. Well, the Economic Secretary to the Treasury, Andrew Griffith, says it's good for vulnerable people.
Cash is important, it's here to stay for the long term. Many people, the elderly, the vulnerable, particularly rural communities, do depend on that access to cash. And if we want our shops to continue to take cash over the counter, then of course those businesses have got to have somewhere to deposit it. So the rules that we're announcing also cover the ability of businesses to deposit cash in a location that's convenient to them.
The BBC presenter Stephen Nolan has apologised after reports claimed he had shared a sexually explicit photograph with staff. It was said that Mr Nolan shared an image of Stephen Bear when he had wanted to book him as a guest on his TV show. Addressing the allegations on his morning radio show on Radio Ulster on Friday, Nolan said, "I can say one thing, and it is that I am sorry." Cornwall Council and Devon and Cornwall Police will allow pubs and clubs across the county to open at 10 a.m. for the World Cup final this Sunday. The decision comes after Michael Gove wrote to councils across Britain requesting earlier opening times for fans to watch the match. Foreign Secretary James Cleverly and Culture, Media and Sport Secretary Lucy Fraser will be representing the country at the match against Spain. England forward Alessia Russo says the team can't wait for the big day.
This is the biggest game, the one that you dream about, the one that means the most, but I feel like it will hit when we're in the tunnel and we're ready to walk out. And yeah, I think it's an incredible occasion. It's been an unbelievable tournament, and this is it. This is exactly where we want to be, and we can't wait.
You're watching GB News across the UK on TV, in your car, on digital radio and on your smart speaker by saying play GB News. Now, though, it's time to go back to Tom and Pip.
Welcome back to the Live Desk. Just bringing you a quick bit of breaking news. We're talking about the build-up to the final of the Women's World Cup in Sydney on Sunday morning. Just hearing that the Foreign Secretary, James Cleverly, will attend the final in Sydney. There's been a lot of talk about should Rishi Sunak go, should Prince William go. Well, we understand they're not, but Foreign Secretary James Cleverly says he will be there.
Hope he can get in some good diplomatic work at the same time, shore up that AUKUS deal, meet Anthony Albanese, perhaps.
We'll be hearing about it if he does, Tom.
Yeah. No, well, moving on to our big story today, GB News has helped to save cash. Yes, the use of cash across the UK will stay protected as part of a new plan by the Treasury.
It comes after GB News hand-delivered its Don't Kill Cash petition to Downing Street with almost 300,000 signatures. Under new laws to preserve paper money, banks will be fined unless cash is made available to customers within 3 miles of their homes and just 1 mile for those in towns and cities.
Well, the Economic Secretary to the Treasury, Andrew Griffiths, said that GB News has it spot on. Let's get the opinion of business and economics broadcaster Michael Wilson now. Michael, do you agree with the verdict of the government here? It's quite extraordinary to see them name-check GB News in their press release.
Well, for your sake, for all our sakes, I hope it's right. I don't see a great deal of this happening. I'll tell you why. Because the banks themselves are involved in a numbers game. And the numbers game involves the shareholders. And shareholders want to see results from the sort of investment that they have in banks. I think over the years that banks have forgotten what they ought to be, the big banks. They ought to be the financial GPs of society. They're part of the warp and weft of society, and this is how they ought to be. This is what they need to do. I don't see them doing that at all. What I see is they don't like cash, they don't like customers a great deal, and they don't want to see... Now, listen, so supposing you've got some viewers, and I'm sure you have, who have their own businesses. Now, here's a little survey for you. How far do they actually have to take that cash before the bank accepts it and before it pays it in to their daily account? Those are the kind of issues we're talking about. Number 10 is absolutely fine. Politicians are absolutely fine. But the reality is, what do banks do for the general customer? My suggestion is they do more for the shareholder than the customer, him or herself.
And one of the concerns is about this announcement, Michael, that actually if the use of cash does decline, then actually the distances that people will be able to go to get free cash will actually be shortened. Well, that's not good for people either, is it?
So who says it's going to shorten? If you have a bank account and you're not particularly computer savvy, and there are a load of people in this country who are not, who have probably got quite big accounts with banks, they want to get their hands on the cash. What is the big problem with that? I mean, I do find that quite extraordinary, and I've interviewed a number of bank chiefs a bit about this over the years. I know what they're doing. What they want to do is they want to to stop their heavy operations, which involve cash and taking it back to a central place and all the rest of it. But what they're doing is they're alienating a growing band of people who will be saying to themselves, I want a bank. What we used to do in the old days was to talk about the bank manager being a financial GP. That no longer happens. You're talking to young people who are box tickers. That's no good. It's your money. You ought to have access to your cash. And unfortunately, cash is not where banks want to be. Ask them about this.
No, I think that's an astute observation. There's a reason why banks have been moving away from cash. They find it much easier to deal with electronic transactions. But this announcement from the Treasury now would mean that it's a legal obligation to have ATMs near where people live, so people can, any time of day or night, go to those ATMs, put in their credit card and take out their cash. That's a step in the right direction.
It is a step in the right direction, but the devil's in the detail. Who, therefore, is going to bring a case towards the banks? Who can afford the lawyers to hit the banks and say, here I am, I couldn't have access to my cash? Who's going to actually do that? Will it take a consumer revolt? I suspect it probably will. And I think that's what you're talking about right now. I think that the customers of banks should be saying to the banks themselves, I will stay a customer of your bank, but what you've got to do is you've got to prove to me that I can have access to my cash, easy access to my cash when I like. And that is not happening right now, because I'm not wrong about this. The amount of ATMs are actually reducing. Banks do not want to have the...
Michael Wilson, I'm so sorry for interrupting you, but we have got some breaking news that we do need to bring to our viewers and listeners, and that is that the former nurse, Lucy Letby, has been found guilty of the murder of 7 babies in her care whilst she was working on the neonatal unit at the Countess of Chester Hospital. Now, Lucy Letby is originally from Hereford. She had denied all charges. She had been charged with murdering 7 babies and attempting to kill 10 others. This was at the Countess of Chester Hospital. The trial has lasted some 9 months. Here is the latest on this breaking news story. Jurors have delivered their verdict. Our North and West of England reporter Sophie Reaper has the story.
The most horrific crime possible. The murder of a baby. Back in 2018, Lucy Letby was arrested on suspicion of just that.
Did you have any concerns that there was a rise in the mortality rate? Yes. Okay, so tell me about that. What concerns did you have?
I think we don't just notice as a team in general, the nursing staff, that this was a rise compared to previous years.
New parents here at the Countess of Chester Hospital put their trust in the staff on its neonatal unit. That was only to find out later that one of the nurses was a killer. As the number of incidents on the unit began to rise, so did the suspicions of Lucy Letby's colleagues. This ultimately prompted an investigation by Cheshire Constabulary to try and provide some answers for the heartbroken families involved.
I think it's hard to imagine what the families are going through. I think she used a cover of trust that she'd gained, the trust of parents, the trust of her colleagues and her friends, to commit these crimes in such an unimaginable way.
In October of last year, Lucy Letby's trial began as the former nurse faced charges of murdering 7 babies and attempting to murder a further 10. A jury at Manchester Crown Court sat week after week, month after month, hearing details about each of the babies involved, from child A all the way through to child Q.
Lucy Letby watched on from the dock as the court was shown images from her home and hospital rotas which identify her as the only person working at the time of every single incident. The evidence also included a series of handwritten notes found amongst the former nurse's belongings, on one of which she'd written things like, "I killed them on purpose because I'm not good enough, and I am evil, I did this." Then, almost 8 months after the trial began, the defendant took to the stand for the very first time. She maintained her innocence throughout, telling the court she'd been devastated by the accusations. She said, "I only ever did my best to care for them." But ultimately, her defence wasn't enough for the jury, and the nurse, once trusted to care for defenceless babies, was found guilty of murder. Sophie Reaper, GB News.
Well, there we have it. The 33-year-old Lucy Letby, now guilty, confirmed to be the worst ever mass murderer of children in the United Kingdom's history.
Yes, we are hearing that Lucy Letby was not in the dock when the jury was discharged a few minutes ago after finding her guilty of murdering 7 babies and attempting to murder 6 others. Her parents were also not in court, but families of the victims were in the public gallery to hear the verdicts. Now, verdicts on 16 of the 22 counts she faced were returned by the jury a few days ago, but they could not be reported until now. The jury couldn't reach verdicts on 6 counts of attempted murder. She has been now convicted at Manchester Crown Court of murdering 7 babies and attempting to kill 10 others. This happened at the Countess of Chester Hospital between June 2015 and June 2016. There has been 9 months of evidence, so a very, very harrowing trial for the jurors of this case. They heard evidence including that Lucy Letby deliberately injected babies with air and she poisoned them with insulin. The case has been heard in front of Judge Mr. Justice James Goss. Lucy Letby found guilty today. She has been found not guilty. We are hearing this news is coming in as we speak. So we are hearing that Lucy Letby has been found not guilty of 1 count of attempted murder of child H. The jury at Manchester Crown Court could not reach a verdict on a 2nd count of attempted murder of the child. The jury also found Letby guilty of the murder of child I. She was alleged to have killed the baby girl on the 4th attempt after giving her air and overfeeding her with milk. The jury could not reach a verdict on a charge of attempted murder of child J. Now, as you can now understand from what you're hearing, what you're seeing, this is a very complicated case and involves a number of babies. We are getting more and more information in. She has been found guilty of the murder of child E, who was a baby boy. She was accused of injecting air into his bloodstream and deliberately causing bleeding to him at the Countess of Chester Hospital. She has also been convicted of the attempted murder of child F, who was the twin brother of child E, who was poisoned with insulin. She has been found guilty of 2 counts of attempted murder relating to child G and not guilty of 1 count of attempted murder of the same child. You can now understand why this trial has lasted some 9 months. Jurors hearing 9 months' worth of evidence in relation to Lucy Letby, 33 years old, originally from Hereford, who had denied all charges. This is a mugshot of Lucy Letby that has now been released by police in light of that verdict. She's been found guilty of murdering 7 babies and attempting to murder others while working on a hospital's neonatal unit between 2015 and 2016.
Now, the neonatal unit saw a spike in unexplained deaths for young children and babies of which the common link appeared to be Lucy Letby. That is what began this investigation, and that is what began this trial. Let's cross now to Manchester Crown Court, where Sophie Reaper, our reporter, is there for us. Sophie, what an extraordinary verdict.
It's absolutely unbelievable. This court case started back in October of last year, so we've now entered 10 months of this trial. The jury was sent out by Justice Goss back on the afternoon of Monday, the 10th of July. This is day 22 of deliberations. They have had a total of 110 hours and 26 minutes of deliberations. That is absolutely incomprehensible in terms of what we usually see a jury taking. But of course, there are 22 charges on this indictment that the former nurse was facing. I know we've just been hearing some of the charges and the verdicts that the jury brought back, but I'll just summarise them. We now know that Lucy Letby has been found guilty of 7 murders. That's of child A, child C, child D, child E, child I, child O and child P. Of course, those names redacted for anonymity purposes. She's also been found guilty of 7 attempted murders of child B, 2 counts of attempting to murder child G, child F, child L, child M and child N. We also now know that she's been found not guilty of the attempted murder of child G and 1 count of attempting to murder child H. Then finally, there's those 6 counts that the jury were left hung on, and what that means is they were unable to come to a decision. That jury comprising of 7 women and 4 men. Of course, usually a jury consists of 12 people. A few weeks ago, the Justice Goss in this case, he released one of the jurors due to what he described as a good personal reason. We now have those, or now had those 11 jurors, should I say. They've just been discharged by Justice Goss after they came into the court to tell us that even given more time and the majority direction, they would be unable to come to any more majority verdicts. So those 6 counts were left hung. Now, one huge thing that we will take away from this court case is, with Lucy Letby being found guilty of those 7 murders, she now becomes the most prolific serial killer of children in modern British history. Just take that in for a moment. The most prolific serial killer of babies and children in modern UK history. That is what she will be known as. Of course, the sentencing is yet to come. We don't know yet what sentencing Justice Goss will pass. That's going to happen as of Monday of next week, the morning he's told us, from 10 a.m. But of course, we can't talk about children murders without thinking about who Lucy Letby has taken over. That title was held by Rose West. She was charged with the murder of 5 children. But of course now, with those 7 murders she's been found guilty of by the jury here at Manchester Crown Court, that is now Lucy Letby. She becomes the most prolific serial killer of children in modern UK history. Now, let's talk a little bit about the reaction that Lucy Letby has had to these verdicts. Of course, initially she was highly emotional. As she was taken from the dock, we heard those sobs. But the next time when we heard, of course, these verdicts came in over several days. That first time there were sobs, but the second time we saw her, we heard effectively nothing. Her hands were over her face, and there was no real reaction. Then over the past few days, we haven't seen the defendant at all. She refused to come up to the dock to see the families of those victims, to see her own parents, who of course have also been beside themselves as they've been hearing these verdicts coming in. Now, Lucy Letby herself, throughout this trial, I would say I of course have been here since October, coming and delivering reports on this trial. Since October, she has relatively been calm and collected throughout. Of course, there have been times where that facade has slipped and we've seen the emotion. There's been a couple of times, for example, when she was giving evidence, that we saw those tears, we saw the emotion there. There was also one instance where we had to stop proceedings proceedings for the day because she just became too emotional, and she said it was all too much for her. So that facade has slipped at times, and of course we see that again now. We've been seeing verdicts. Initially there was the emotion, but then she was able to compose herself again, and she just appeared as though nothing was happening whatsoever. And then of course she has refused to come up to the dock whatsoever. Of course we have to talk about the families in this case, the families who of course have been so devastated. 7 babies murdered by Lucy Letby. Of course, many of them have been present in Manchester Crown Court, not only during jury deliberations, but throughout the entire 10 months of this trial. They of course have been absolutely on the most emotional roller coaster one could ever imagine going on. We've seen tears, we've seen anger. One parent stormed from the room today after hearing that no more verdicts could be delivered. Of course, it is highly emotionally charged. But just to summarise all of this, of course, this is such a hugely complex case, and over the coming days, of course, I know shortly we'll be hearing a statement from the Crown Prosecution Service. There'll also be a statement from the Countess of Chester Hospital, of course, where all of these incidents took place between June of 2015 and June of 2016. They'll be putting out a statement later on today that we'll be bringing you. But just to summarise, we now know after 10 months that Lucy Letby, the former nurse, has been found guilty of multiple counts of murder, 7 counts of murder, 7 counts of attempted murder, and found not guilty of 2 counts of attempted murder.
Well, Sophie, this is the most extraordinary story, the most prolific child murderer in modern British history. There must now be questions asked of how this was allowed to take place 8 years ago, why it took so long for this individual to be brought to justice, and where the failings have been clearly taking place throughout the NHS, throughout perhaps social services, throughout the entire British state.
Absolutely, Tom, and this is something that has been discussed throughout the entirety of this trial. We don't know anything just yet, but one would imagine there will be investigations into the Countess of Chester Hospital and the wider NHS as to how something like this was allowed to happen. The number of incidents taking place over the span of a year. I mean, the first few murders, I believe, took place over just 2 weeks. And of course, colleagues of Lucy Letby's have given evidence throughout this trial. 4 of them have said that they believed that she was guilty, and that they had always suspected that she was guilty of something. So it now becomes the question, what will happen? I'm sure the families will, especially those perhaps who haven't had a verdict, those 6 who were left as a hung jury, they will have questions as to what did happen then. Of course, the 2 that were not guilty is then what did happen to their children at the Countess of Chester Hospital all those years ago. Of course, this isn't a new story for the NHS. We can't really talk about baby murderers without talking about Beverly Allett, who, of course, back in 1991, she was found guilty of the murder of 3 babies and 1 child. She became known in the media as the Angel of Death. Of course, Lucy Letby far surpasses the number of deaths she has been charged with now, but what Beverly Allett was most known for was her choice, which was insulin poisoning, and that is what Lucy Letby has also been found guilty of, 2 counts of attempted murder via insulin poisoning. So this now becomes a much wider investigation, one would imagine, into exactly how this was allowed to happen, and as you say, exactly how it's been so many years before we've managed to come to this point today of finding Lucy Letby guilty of those crimes.
Sophie, I just want to come back to the details of what's been happening in court, because it's important that we explain to people again about court restrictions that have meant that we've been unable to name the babies or give any details that would identify them. But we can now say that of the 7 that were killed, 5 were boys and 2 were girls. And 2 of the boys were brothers from a set of triplets.
That is indeed the case. There are so many complexities to this case. As you mentioned there, child O and P, I believe they were the two boys who were a set of triplets. Child A and child B, they were a set of twins. Of course, one of them murdered, one of them attempted to be murdered. Child L and M, I believe we actually have an interview with the parents of child L and M. Lucy Letby, of course, found guilty of attempting to murder both of those, their twin boys. So there is a theme running throughout this indictment, is that there are several instances of both twins and triplets.
Sophie, thank you for the moment. Do stay where you are. We will come back to you, but we just want to give viewers more information about this trial, about the worst serial killer of children in modern times. That is now Lucy Letby. Now, since October of last year, 13 families have waited to see if she did indeed attack their children. Just one of those are the parents of child L and child M, twins that the former nurse attempted to murder back in 2016.
In order to protect their identities, their names and faces have been concealed in this report, and their answers have been voiced by actors. Now, GB News national reporter Paul Hawkins has this.
I think she was unsuccessful with killing my kids. That's why she was very annoyed with us. She thought that I couldn't kill your baby.
In April 2016, Lucy Letby tried to murder a set of twin boys. She was unsuccessful, but 7 years later, her unspeakable actions still haunt the parents of child L and child M.
She was very cool, calm, calculated and a criminal-minded lady, but we didn't notice anything at the time because she created the impression to the doctors, to the staff and everyone that I'm a very good nurse, I'm doing very well. She created that impression and pressured the doctors and everyone. That's why no one suspected her.
To me, nothing. She means nothing. Just an evil person. There's no way she should have been able to get away with it for so long.
At around 4 o'clock that afternoon, child M required resuscitation after their health deteriorated rapidly.
He was just crying. And I said, oh my God, what happened? And the doctor was giving compressions to baby M. One of the nurses said to me, I've not done anything. And Lucy was behind her. And I was just praying to God saying, what has happened to my child? I've not done anything wrong in my life to anybody, so why do I have to suffer?
Meanwhile, Letby was slowly poisoning their other baby, child L, with insulin.
Well, when we heard about baby L's issue, we were shocked because the hospital had not told us.
Yes, exactly. When the police came to our house and told us, your second child is involved with Lucy, we were shocked and we said we didn't know about baby L. Why had they not told us about baby L? We did know about baby M, but they hadn't told us about baby L.
It was just unbelievable. We couldn't believe it.
Although Letby's trial is now over, the parents of child L and M are not yet satisfied. For them, the Countess of Chester Hospital still has questions to answer.
A public inquiry. The higher management, they need to be held accountable. The doctors raised their concerns and they didn't act upon them. They dismissed them. And it could have been prevented. If they'd acted upon the initial suspicions, then they definitely could have stopped any more babies being attacked.
She took everything. Our joy, happiness.
I'm not the same person I was before. And in the run-up to the case, I'd suffered a seizure. Before October, I suffered a seizure. It's just constant. I'm a changed person. It's been hell, to be honest.
Very, very horrendous.
Paul Hawkins, GB News.
If you are just joining us, we are bringing you the breaking news that nurse Lucy Letby has been found guilty of murdering 7 babies who were being looked after in a neonatal ward. Lucy Letby is now the UK's most prolific killer of babies in modern times. Our correspondent Sophie Reaper has been following this trial throughout. This is Lucy Letby, who actually in recent days has refused to appear in court. We can join Sophie Reaper. We're getting more information, Sophie, about what the judge said to the jury as he discharged them after so many months. And he did actually say, didn't he, that this has been a most distressing and upsetting case. And the families of the babies were in court. I mean, what on earth was their reaction as they heard these verdicts?
Well, just to answer quickly about what the judge said to the jury, he has in fact now discharged that jury and told them that they will never have to serve jury duty again, given the nature of this trial. Like you say, it has been highly distressing. He also offered them any help that they may need in terms of counselling, because of course the material that's been dealt with in this trial, even just listening as a journalist in the court, it has been truly so horrendous to hear the actions that we now know that Lucy Letby has been found guilty of, that she carried out between June of 2015 and June of 2016. Now, the families, of course, as I was saying earlier, they've been hearing the verdicts over the past week or so across various days. As each parent has heard effectively the fate of their baby, we've seen them react individually. Now, these families have, we've heard, become very close over the past 10 months. Of course, they work alongside family liaison officers, but they've all become a sort of support system for one another, and that much was evident as we've been hearing those verdicts. As the verdicts for child G came in a few days ago, one of the other parents was seen passing tissues back to the parents of child G as they reacted. Of course, parents of children A and B, one of whom was found Lucy Letby was found guilty of their murder, and the other, Lucy Letby, was found guilty of attempting to murder. We saw their reaction as they heard what Lucy Letby had effectively done to their babies, and they were just inconsolable. As you would expect, this is the most horrendous thing to go through, as we all know that the trials and tribulations of a pregnancy, and to then find out that a woman who you should have been able to trust, a nurse above all else, had tried to either had attempted to murder your baby or had been successful in murdering your baby. 7 sets of parents now know that Lucy Letby, that nurse who had dealt with them throughout labour, had then gone on to carry out a murder. I just think there is nothing more horrific than what these families have had to go through.
Sophie, it is extraordinary to hear again and again the methods which were used: injection with insulin, force feeding with milk, and indeed injecting air into little babies. We understand that Lucy Letby was saying that these sudden and unexplained deaths, which happened to take place at the time she was on the ward, were due to not enough staffing levels in the NHS. She tried to blame the hospital. How did that go down?
Well as you can expect, she obviously... I will say, for the insulin deaths, we did hear when she gave her defence that she said that someone must have tried to poison those babies. And I think that's perhaps why we heard those 2 verdicts, those 2 guilty verdicts on the 2 insulin-attempted murders first, because she herself admitted that someone had to have attempted to poison those babies. The other instances of both of murder and attempted murder, those methods, of course, over the course of the 10 months, as we've been hearing evidence, we've heard from various medical experts who've walked the court and the jury through exactly what that will have meant. And it's at times it's been really rather graphic and difficult to hear. I know the journalists in court have also found it very emotional hearing those final moments for 7 of those babies. We've heard evidence from a huge spectrum of people across this court case. The amount of evidence produced by Cheshire Police is also just...
Can I just jump in?
Unbelievable. It is absolutely... Of course.
Sophie, I just want to say we are now just hearing that the sentencing of Lucy Letby will be at 10 a.m. this Monday in front of Judge Mr. Justice James Goss. She will be facing life imprisonment, won't she?
Well, it's a very difficult one to say, of course, in terms of speculation, but I think in this case we can safely say that if she has become the most prolific child serial killer in modern British history, that must indeed be the case. Now, she may be facing that sentence, but what she won't face, we don't think, is the victims or the victims' families. We heard, I mentioned earlier, of course, that she hasn't been coming up into the dock the past few days. Justice Goss asked the defence about this, and Benjamin Myers, the KC, told us that, in fact, it was her decision that she would no longer be appearing in the dock. Of course, we've seen this several cases over the past few years, most notably Thomas Cashman. He refused to come up. It was here at Manchester Crown Court. He refused to come up and see Olivia Pratt-Court-Bell's family. We have the same situation here, that Lucy Letby, we believe, will refuse to come up and see the faces of the families of her victims. We know now that that will be at 10 a.m. on Monday. We expect that what will happen first is we'll hear those victim impact statements that we always hear at a sentencing. Now, we understand there will be around 17, which would mean we would expect that to be one per baby on the indictment, that most likely the parents will have written down exactly how it's been, how this court case, and moreover how Lucy Letby's actions have indeed affected them over the past years, since between 2015 and 2016, when those incidents were carried out. We'll hear those victim impact statements, and then we will hear Judge Goss give his sentencing. And although Lucy Letby will most likely not be present, he told us yesterday that he will still deliver his sentencing as if she was indeed present. So we will be bringing you the live sentencing here from Manchester Crown Court. So if anyone is watching and feels slightly confused as to why it seems the judge is addressing someone who isn't there, that's a decision that he has made, perhaps for the comfort of the families, so that they feel as though someone really is being addressed and that someone really is having to face up to the actions of Lucy Letby, a murderer.
Well, Sophie Rupert, thank you so much for bringing us the very latest there outside the court where this decision has been made today. We'll be crossing, of course, back to Sophie Rupert through the course of the afternoon. It is the most extraordinary story of the most prolific child murderer in modern British history.
Yeah, and just to recap, if you are just joining us, Lucy Letby, 33 years old, a former nurse, has been found guilty of murdering 7 babies in her care and attempting to murder another 6 babies at the Countess of Chester Hospital. That's over a year-long period. And 5 of the victims were boys, 2 were girls, and 2 of the boys were brothers from a set of triplets.
Well, let's cross now to Simon Harding, a former Met Police senior investigating officer who can join us now. Simon, thank you for joining us this afternoon on what is just the most extraordinary story. In your experience in the police force, have you come close to anything that comes near to what we've been hearing over the last few days?
No, certainly not in my experience. I mean, you can deal with many murders over the years, but to actually, be faced with somebody, a serial killer, and a serial killer of babies is highly unusual. And, even in British police forces, we have to go back to the early 90s with Beverly Allitt to see when that happened before. It's very similar kind of things with insulin. So, no, it's not something you experience very often. But what you can see there is that the police and the Crown Prosecution Service have done, what appears to be an amazing job to get this all together. Many, you're dealing with many different murders here. They all have to be treated individually as cases, but then brought together as one prosecution. And similarly, the way that the jury have dealt with this, they've had to deliberate on individual murder cases and then bring them all together.
And for detectives, this is such a massive, intricate case to investigate, isn't it?
Oh, it will be. Yeah, I mean, it's it's so difficult in terms of some sort of general murders that you see. But when you're talking about babies and insides of babies haven't been formed properly, it's very difficult to get through those those loopholes and stages you have to get to prove exactly how somebody died. And in this case, very young babies. So yeah, an amazing job, and a lot of credit to the officers that have carried out this investigation.
It is certainly the most extraordinary investigation, the 110 hours of deliberation from the jury, the 9 months of evidence that they will have been hearing. What will the jury's experience have been like? Have you dealt with cases that sort of come close to this?
Well, you do deal with a lot of cases where the jury are very invested in the case. Especially cases which take a long time, and they become very emotionally attached to the victims in terms of even though they don't know them, the families that are there. These families will be watching them. They'll be able to see those families all the time. During the trial itself, and then to go into the room and that tradition that we have of 12 people that sit together and discuss, and they bring all their experiences of life into that room to take apart that case, to understand, and you can tell they really have, dealt with this very, very precisely. They've deliberated for a long time, and it's rightly so that they appear to have done their job perfectly. They found, what they could safely say are murder convictions, and some which they couldn't necessarily come to conclusions on. There'll be decisions about those to come as well, because there might be decisions as to whether those cases which haven't necessarily been decided upon may go back into a further trial. But that's something for the Crown Prosecution Service and the police to decide at a later date.
And the Crown Prosecution Service, they've released a statement. And I think you alluded to this, that they're talking about the fact that innocuous substances like air, milk, fluids or medication like insulin, they become lethal in the wrong hands. And Lucy Letby weaponised her craft to inflict harm, grief and death.
Yeah, that's a very powerful statement. Weaponising her craft, as though this is something which she really wanted to do. The premeditation appears to be there, obviously, because of the number of babies that she's ended the life or tried to. So yeah, it's a very powerful statement, and the CPS themselves will be, should be credited. They don't often get the credit nowadays. They are short-staffed, like the police are, like everybody else is, but. There's a lot of people done a lot of work around this, and there'll be lots of specialist departments in various in the hospitals that may have helped everybody to bring this person. And this girl is unlikely ever to see the light of day again.
And Simon, just give us a bit of an insight into what support will have been given to the police, by the police liaison officers, to the bereaved families.
Yeah, so the policing in this country, we have, we are world leaders in family liaison. We're one of those that invented it. I'm so proud of that system as a police officer. The officers that are family liaison officers are trained. They are people like you and I. They are trained. They look after these families. They help them through the process from the very start, right the way through the trial, as much as they can, explaining things along with the senior officers. And every other detective that is working on the case, and they will give that emotional support as much as they can, but they will give that support which helps explain different things, nuances in the criminal justice system that may be slightly complicated. And hope then that everybody understands what's happened, even those that potentially we're talking about people who will be disappointed as well that verdicts haven't been reached on their children.
Simon Harding, former Met Police Senior Investigating Officer, really appreciate your thoughts this afternoon. Thank you.
Well, let's cross now back to Manchester, where Sophie Reaper has been following this case. Because, Sophie, we are expecting imminently a press conference live from Manchester Crown Court.
We are indeed. You can probably see the microphones set up just here behind me as we're expecting that statement from CPS. Then a little bit later on today, we'll hear a statement from the Countess of Chester Hospital. Of course, everyone wanting now that we have those verdicts, to have their say. CPS, I'm sure, will focus more on the impacts this has had on the families, but also the work behind the scenes that they have done to finally reach this verdict.
It is just extraordinary, the amount of detail that we are getting, the number of babies who have been involved. And I think many people will be dwelling on that particular detail that 2 out of 3 triplets were murdered by this nurse, by Lucy Letby. To many people, that will strike out as something that is particularly evil. There will be a child growing up in Britain today whose 2 siblings were killed by this nurse.
Yeah, that's the case, unfortunately. Of course, we'll never know who that third triplet is because of the lifelong anonymity that has been granted to him and to his 2 siblings that were murdered and to his wider family. But as you say, what could be worse than that? But this case is so complex, and it's hard to put it into words, really, that that not just that family, there are 7 babies that have been murdered at the hands of Lucy Letby. 7 babies throughout the span of a year at that Countess of Chester Hospital on the neonatal unit. Those families will have gone through pregnancy and will have gone through labour, and then they'll have placed their children in the hands of Lucy Letby, thinking that they would be cared for and that they would be safe. Lucy Letby, in her evidence, said that's all she ever wanted to do, was to care for the babies that she was tasked with looking after. But we now know that on 7 occasions, what she in fact did was kill them. And that is just such a stark contrast. Nurses is one of those professions that we just automatically assume are good people with hearts of gold that we can trust with our children. And that now brings into question if that is indeed the case. Parents up and down the country will see these verdicts today and ask that question themselves, because they now see that anything is really possible. If Lucy Letby was not only capable but also given the opportunity to carry out those murders, then who knows? There clearly is no stopping some people. It's truly so horrendous.
A lot of people at home today might be sitting back and thinking, this woman is not just a murderer, a terrible serial killer of children, but also a coward, because she did not turn up to sit in that dock in the last few days of this trial. She is going to avoid sitting in the dock for her sentencing on Monday. This is someone who is not facing up to her actions.
Well, that is our understanding. We do know that she hasn't been in the dock for the last few set of verdicts that we've received, and we've heard from Benjamin Myers KC, the defence in this case, that it's Lucy Letby's intention to not be in the dock for that sentencing on Monday. So I'm sure you're absolutely right. There will be viewers today who think the word coward is rather quite apt for Lucy Letby, because she won't come to the dock. She won't look into the faces of the families of the babies she murdered or attempted to murder and face up to what she has done. Throughout this entire trial, she has pled not guilty on all of the 22 charges on this indictment. She has always maintained her innocence, and yet today we can now say that she was in fact not innocent on several. She was found not guilty on 2 of the attempted murders, but that she was found guilty of 7 murders and 7 attempted murders, and as you say, making her the most prolific serial killer of children in modern British history.
Sophie, plenty of reaction coming in to these guilty verdicts, including from prosecutors. We haven't yet heard from the Countess of Chester Hospital, where these murders took place. But questions will be now asked of hospital bosses, won't they, about, whether they called police early enough. Were the warnings there that something was very wrong?
I think that will indeed be the case. We know that later on today we will hear a statement from the Countess of Chester Hospital. They will, of course, now want to have their side of the story told. But throughout this court case, that has been a question asked. How did it go on for so long? Why were there not more questions asked about this huge influx in the number of incidents taking place on their neonatal unit? There were questions asked by staff. In fact, I remember one particularly poignant bit of evidence that we heard in
the case was that after the third murder, I believe it was, one of Lucy Letby's colleagues actually texted Lucy Letby and said to her, "I can't believe you were on again," already showing that people were starting to question Lucy Letby's presence at all of these incidents taking place. Of course, we've seen the hospital rotas as part of the trial. We've seen that hard copy of the evidence, which shows it's a table with all of the neonatal unit staff. And as you look down it, I think the person who was next most present for the incidents was someone who was there for 7 out of 22. That's the next highest number of a person being present, where Lucy Letby was present for all 22. It's quite a stark contrast, wouldn't you say?
Absolutely. Sophie, we will come back to you. We're actually looking at pictures now of the moment Lucy Letby was arrested. I'm not sure whether there's any sound on that footage, otherwise we would play it you. It is mute. But that is the moment that she was arrested over the murders. She is been found guilty at Manchester Crown Court today of murdering 7 babies in her care and attempting to murder 6 others. We are expecting a press conference very shortly, which we will bring to you live here on GB News.
Now, after this trial that's lasted more than 10 months, the jury in the Lucy Letby trial delivered their verdict, of course. They found the former nurse guilty of the murdering and attempting to murder babies whilst she was working on the neonatal unit at that hospital. Well, let's get the full details of how events transpired. Sophie Reaper has this report.
Oh, Lucy, is it? The most horrific crime possible. The murder of a baby. Back in 2018, Lucy Letby was arrested on suspicion of just that.
Did you have any concerns that there was a rise in the mortality rate?
Yes.
Okay, so tell me about that. What concerns did you have?
I think we don't just notice as a team in general, the nursing staff, that this was a rise compared to previous years.
New parents here at the Countess of Chester Hospital put their trust in the staff on its neonatal unit. That was only to find out later that one of the nurses was a killer. As the number of incidents on the unit began to rise, so did the suspicions of Lucy Letby's colleagues. This ultimately prompted an investigation by Cheshire Constabulary to try and provide some answers for the heartbroken families involved.
I think it's hard to imagine what the families are going through. I think she used a cover of trust that she'd gained, the trust of parents, the trust of her colleagues and her friends, to commit these crimes in such an unimaginable way.
In October of last year, Lucy Letby's trial began, as the former nurse faced charges of murdering 7 babies and attempting to murder a further 10. A jury at Manchester Crown Court sat week after week, month after month, hearing details about each of the babies involved, from child A all the way through to child Q. Lucy Letby watched on from the dock as the court was shown images from her home and hospital rotas which identify her as the only person working at the time of every single incident. The evidence also included a series of handwritten notes found amongst the former nurse's belongings, on one of which she'd written things like, "I killed them on purpose because I'm not good enough, and I am evil, I did this." Then, almost 8 months after the trial began, the defendant took to the stand for the very first time. She maintained her innocence throughout, telling the court she'd been devastated by the accusations. She said, "I only ever did my best to care for them." But ultimately, her defence wasn't enough for the jury, and the nurse, once trusted to care for defenceless babies, was found guilty of murder. Sophie Reaper, GB News.
The face there of Lucy Letby, who has become the most prolific baby killer in modern times. She has been found guilty of murdering 7 babies and attempting to murder 6 others. A trial lasting more than 10 months, believed to be the longest murder trial in the UK. Sophie Reaper, our correspondent, was in court for much of that trial. Sophie, Lucy Letby is likely to be sentenced on Monday morning, but will she appear in court for this sentencing?
I highly doubt it. We've already been told in open court today that that's really not likely to be the case. Justice Goss, the judge presiding over this case, asked a few days ago when Lucy Letby stopped appearing in the dock exactly what was happening. Benjamin Myers KC, the defence in this case, then returned to say that it was Lucy Letby's decision that she was now refusing to appear in the dock, and we now imagine that that will remain the case for the sentencing. So we won't be seeing her for Justice Goss delivering that sentence. We won't be seeing her face the families of the victims. We won't see her reaction to hearing exactly what sentence lies ahead. And as we said before, I think viewers at home perhaps will start to use the word coward, just as they have done previously for people like Thomas Cashman, who also refused earlier on this year, in fact, at Manchester Crown Court, to appear to face Olivia Pratt-Corbell's family for his sentencing. We have the same situation here. She's been found guilty. We now know that she'll have that title of the most prolific serial killer of children in British history, and she just won't come to the dock to face exactly what's waiting for her on Monday morning.
It is 2 o'clock. You are with the live desk on GB News as we bring you the breaking news that nurse Lucy Letby has been found guilty of murdering 7 babies she was looking after in a neonatal unit. She is Britain's worst serial killer of children, the most prolific baby killer in modern times. These verdicts today come after a trial lasting more than 10 months. It is believed to be the longest murder trial in the UK.
Lucy Letby murdered children from June 2015 to June 2016 at the Countess of Chester Hospital. She stands at the age of 33 with the title of the most prolific baby killer in modern British history. 110 hours of deliberation the jury underwent. We're now looking at images of the initial arrest of Lucy Letby, the moment when she likely knew the game was up, when the police came to their house, where they later found evidence written down by Lucy Letby saying things like, "I did it." Notes, handwritten notes, appearing to confess to her crimes.
And to all intents and purposes, Lucy Letby gave the impression of being a caring and committed nurse. She had told the court that she always had wanted to work with children, and she chose A-level exams that would give her the best chance of doing that. But underneath, the court heard that she was actually very cool, very calm, and she was calculating.
Indeed, as the trial continued, Lucy Letby started to not turn up. The last days of the trial, Lucy Letby refused to face those families. We now know those families of the children she killed. Big question marks over whether Lucy Letby will even turn up to her own sentencing, scheduled for Monday morning.
This is the moment police arrested Lucy Letby.
Police attended her turquoise door. You can see there the killer opens. She looks rather surprised as detectives enter her property. Later, she's led out in handcuffs, hands behind her back, a look of shock on her face. Perhaps this is the moment she knew what the next 10 months of her life would be like.
And yet she denied all 22 charges against her. She blamed the deaths on hospital hygiene and staffing levels, when in fact she was deliberately injecting babies with air and poisoning them with insulin. She is due to be sentenced on Monday morning, but these guilty verdicts were delivered this afternoon. What a gruelling process for jurors it has been over the last 10 months, and for the babies' families. And we can now tell you, because there were reporting restrictions during this very long trial, we're not allowed to name the babies, but we can tell you that the victims were 5 boys and 2 girls, and 2 of the boys were brothers from a set of triplets.
Well, here's what Lucy Letby told the police after her arrest.
There have been a lot more deaths, and I've been linked to somebody that was there for a lot of them.
Did you have any concerns that there was a rise in the mortality rate?
Yes.
Okay, so tell me about that. What concerns did you have?
I think we'd all just noticed as a team in general, the nursing staff, that this was a rise compared to previous years.
Lucy Letby being interviewed there after her arrest. Now, the former chief executive of the Countess of Chester Hospital has issued a statement. His name is Tony Chambers, and he says, "All my thoughts are with the children at the heart of this case and their families and loved ones at this incredibly difficult time. The crimes that have been committed are appalling, and I am deeply saddened by what has come to light." It is also understood that Tony Chambers will cooperate fully and openly with any post-trial inquiry. Sophie Reaper, our correspondent, joins us live from Manchester Crown Court. Sophie, you've been following much of this trial. What a day for the babies' families, the jurors in court who have been told they will never have to do jury service again, quite understandably, after this.
Well, this is the day we have all been waiting for, that jury being sent back out on the 10th of July, so well over a month ago. They've had 22 days of deliberations, today, of course, being the 22nd, to deliberate over those 22 counts on the indictment. 110 hours and 26 minutes, making it perhaps one of the longest jury deliberations in British judicial history. And of course, it's understandable, 22 counts on the indictment for the jury to make their way through one by one. They, of course, lost one of the jurors to what the judge described as a good personal reason, making it a jury of 11. There was 7 women, 4 men. When it was unanimous verdicts, which for anyone at home who doesn't know, unanimous means that all 11 of the jurors have to agree on a verdict. On that unanimous verdict, we got the first 2 guilty verdicts, which were on 2 attempted murders. We also heard 1 other unanimous verdict, whereas the rest all came after we heard what's described as a majority direction. And what that means is the judge tells the jury that instead 10-1 can be the split of their decision, meaning that 10 jurors agree on the verdict and 1 disagrees. That's how we have managed to come to all of those other verdicts in this case, and no wonder it's taken them so much time. There has been so much evidence, there have been so many statements, so many witnesses who have given evidence in this trial, so no wonder it's taken since October of last year to get to this point here today, to hear those verdicts here at the Lucy Letby trial at Manchester Crown Court.
The prosecution labelled Lucy Letby as a calculating and devious opportunist who gaslighted colleagues to cover her murderous assaults. What was it like sitting in that courtroom, hearing ever more detail of unspeakably evil acts?
In a word, unbelievable. I have never, in my short career, I have never seen anything quite like it, and I'm sure many of my colleagues from other channels will agree, we perhaps will never see anything like it ever again.
Sophie, for now, thank you. We are expecting that police press conference very shortly, but let's get some reaction from former Met detective Peter Blexley. Peter, thanks for talking to us on GB News. Such a harrowing case, this. What is your reaction?
the deceit, the depravity, the wickedness and the evil words and actions of Lucy Letby will go down in the criminal history books as being what they truly are, depraved beyond the compare and even the thinking of any right-minded person. I would like to praise, for what it's worth, the detectives involved in this case, because they have painstakingly put together an absolute mountain of evidence that, as we heard, took 7 months to be told through the trial. And then, of course, the prosecutors presented that professionally, and the Crown Prosecution Service and the barristers also are deserving of praise. But who really needs enormous praise in all of this is the jury, who for 4 weeks have pored over all the evidence, having listened to it already for 7 months. They really have done their public duty way above and beyond what should normally be expected. So on this occasion, the criminal justice system, of which I have been a stern critic on many an occasion, has actually got it right. The criminal justice system of the UK is shown in its best light today.
It's extraordinary to look at the scale of this investigation. What started with just 8 officers grew and grew until 70 officers and others were working on this particular investigation, instigated by Cheshire Police, that lasted 2 years before the trial began.
Yes, indeed. And there will, of course, be questions about why did the investigation not start earlier? Why did the health authority not bring it to the attention of the police many, many years back? And, of course, there will be an inquiry in due course that will give us the answers to those kind of questions. And I sincerely hope that that inquiry is not yet another watered-down version of somebody's convenient truth, where at the end of it they say lessons have been learnt. Oh, yes, how many times have we learnt that? I would want accountability. I hope that those who looked the other way, those who were too cowardly to say anything, and those who, quite frankly, did not do their job, are held to account, and that there are suitable sanctions held against them.
Peter, the City of Chester MP Samantha Dixon, she very much agrees with you. She has written to the government calling for that public inquiry. She wants it to be full and independent. She says too many people are now living with the consequences of the catastrophic harm caused by Lucy Letby.
Oh, and I echo those words entirely. For so many people, the birth of a baby is something uplifting, unforgettable, joyous, a kind of experience which is such a rarity and such a beautiful thing. And for this wicked, evil woman to wipe these innocent babies from the face of the earth is so horrific that it actually challenges my thinking, because on Monday, when she's sentenced, she will receive a whole life term.
Peter, I'm going to have to interrupt you. We're going live now to Manchester Crown Court for this press conference.
Emotional journey for all of the families involved in this case. I speak on behalf of the entire prosecution team when I say that all of their babies will forever be in our hearts. I would like to thank all of the families in this case for their exceptional resilience and strength throughout this entire investigation. Their composure and their dignity during this trial has been truly overwhelming. The investigation into the circumstances surrounding this case started in May 2017. Since that time, hundreds of witnesses have been spoken by a team of dedicated detectives. Many of those witnesses have returned to court on numerous occasions to give evidence. Without their honesty and their support, the families would not have received the justice that they have received today. I cannot begin to imagine how the families in this case feel today. I just hope that today's verdicts bring all of them some peace of mind for the future, and that we have answered some of the questions that they were looking for. Cheshire Constabulary will continue to support all of the families in this case in the coming days and weeks ahead. There will be a period of reflection as everybody comes to terms with what they've experienced here today. I will now pass you on to my colleague from the Crown Prosecution Service, Pascal Jones.
Thank you, Nicola. Lucy Letby was entrusted to protect some of the most vulnerable babies. Little did those working alongside her know that there was a murderer in their midst. She did her utmost to conceal her crimes by varying the ways in which she repeatedly harmed babies in her care. She sought to deceive her colleagues and pass off the harm she caused as nothing more than a worsening of each baby's existing vulnerability. In her hands, innocuous substances like air, milk, or medication like insulin would become lethal. She perverted her learning and weaponized her craft to inflict harm, grief, and death. Time and again, she harmed babies in an environment which should have been safe for them and their families. Parents were exposed to her morbid curiosity and her fake compassion. Too many of them returned home to empty baby rooms. Many surviving children live with permanent consequences of her assault upon their lives. Her attacks were a complete betrayal of the trust placed in her. My thoughts are with families of the victims who may never have closure, but who now have answers to questions which had troubled them for years. I will now hand over to my colleague Janet Moore from Cheshire Constabulary.
I'm a Family Liaison Coordinator with Cheshire Constabulary. I've been asked to read out a statement on behalf of all the families in this case. Words cannot effectively explain how we are feeling at this moment in time. We are quite simply stunned. To lose a baby is a heartbreaking experience that no parent should ever have to go through. But to lose a baby, or to have a baby harmed in these particular circumstances, is unimaginable. Over the past 7 to 8 years, we've had to go through a long, torturous and emotional journey. From losing our precious newborns and grieving their loss, seeing our children who survived, some of whom are still suffering today, to being told years later that their death or collapse might be suspicious. Nothing can prepare you for that news. Today, justice has been served, and a nurse who should have been caring for our babies has been found guilty of harming them. But this justice will not take away from the extreme hurt, anger and distress that we've all had to experience. Some families did not receive the verdict that they expected, and therefore it is a bittersweet result. We are heartbroken, devastated, angry and feel numb. We may never truly know why this happened. Words cannot express our gratitude to the jury who've had to sit through 145 days of gruelling evidence, which has led to today's verdict. We recognise that this has not been an easy task for them, and we will forever be grateful for their patience and resilience throughout this incredibly difficult process. The police investigation began in 2017, and we've been supported from the very beginning by a team of experienced and dedicated family liaison officers. We want to thank these officers for everything that they've done for us. Medical experts, consultants, doctors and nursing staff have all given evidence at court, which at times has been extremely harrowing and distressing for us to listen to. However, we recognise the determination and commitment that each witness has shown in ensuring that the truth was told. We acknowledge that the evidence given by each of them has been key in securing today's verdict. Finally, we would like to acknowledge and thank the investigation team and more recently the prosecution team who've led the trial to a successful conclusion. The search for the truth has remained at the forefront of everyone's minds, and we will forever be grateful for this. We would now ask for time, in peace, to process what has happened as we come to terms with today's verdict. I would now also like to read out a statement on behalf of the team of family liaison officers who've worked as part of Operation Hummingbird. On behalf of our team of dedicated family liaison officers, I would like to thank all of the families for the immense fortitude and extreme resilience that they've shown over the years. They have acted with dignity and reservedness during a very long trial, whilst hearing the most horrendous evidence. We are all extremely humbled by them. I hope that the support that we have provided to all of the families has been of some comfort to them during an incredibly difficult period. We have worked closely alongside His Majesty's Court Service to ensure that the families have been able to watch court proceedings in Manchester as well as remotely over the past 10 months. This has assisted them greatly in being able to view the trial with more ease. We would like to thank court staff for all their help with this. Whilst today's verdict can by no means relieve the suffering that families have gone through and are still going through, we hope that will bring them some comfort. Our thoughts remain with you all. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Well, that was a police press conference just given on behalf of Cheshire Constabulary to the news that nurse, or former nurse, Lucy Letby has been found guilty at Manchester Crown Court of murdering 7 babies and attempting to murder 6 others. Jurors at that trial sat through 145 days of evidence. And Lucy Letby is now the UK's most prolific killer of babies in modern times. She's due to be sentenced on Monday morning. The statement was read out by police officers, and a statement was read out on behalf of bereaved families. They say that they are heartbroken, devastated, angry and numb when they consider the crimes of killer Lucy Letby, who took their babies away from them. And interestingly, what we haven't touched upon in any great detail so far, but what was said was that these families are looking after children who were babies, they're now 6 or 7 years old. They survived, but they are still suffering today because Lucy Letby was found guilty of attempting to murder 6 babies. So they survived. They are still suffering today.
That's right. We've been hearing from DCI Nicola Evans, from Pascal Jones of the Crown Prosecution Service, and from Janet Moore of Cheshire Constabulary, the liaison officer for those families, who said that Lucy Letby weaponised her craft, turning her training against those who were placed in her care.
Our correspondent Sophie Reaper was listening to that press conference. Such a powerful statement from the bereaved families, Sophie. So unbelievably hard for them these last few years.
It's completely harrowing, all 3 of those statements that we just heard. So let's just unpack them a little bit. We heard there from Nicola Evans, who, of course, has previously spoken to the press about Operation Hummingbird. She said there she thanked the families for their strength. Of course, this has been a huge undertaking for Cheshire Constabulary, but it's also been incredibly hard on those families to hear day after day exactly the treatment that Lucy Letby gave to their children. We then heard, as you say there, from CPS, and a particularly poignant quote that I'll just reread out there. In her hands, innocuous substances like air, milk, fluids, or medication like insulin would become lethal. She perverted her learning and weaponised her craft to inflict harm, grief and death. Of course, we now know she was guilty of 7 murders between June of 2015 and June of 2016. We then heard from that family liaison coordinator. Of course, all of the families involved in this case have had an incredibly hard time, and Cheshire Constabulary have made it really quite a priority to make sure that that support has been in place. She the family liaison coordinator said that when she read that statement out from the families, that they can't effectively explain how they're feeling at this moment in time. They described it as a heartbreaking experience that no parent should ever have to go through, describing it as a long, torturous and emotional journey. Of course, this trial beginning here at Manchester Crown Court back in October of last year. 10 months ago, the jury first began to hear evidence here at Manchester Crown Court, and the families, whether they were here or whether they were a family annex in Chester, they've had to hear the graphic details of not only what their child experienced, but now that we know that Lucy Letby was the person behind them experiencing. Of course, one of the most important things that was said in that family statement was that some families did not receive the result they expected, and it's therefore bittersweet. 6 of the counts on that 22-count indictment were a hung jury, meaning they were unable to come to a decision one way or another, and that means the families, they don't have an answer. Two of the counts were also found not guilty. That was 1 count of attempting to murder child G and 1 count of attempting to murder child H. Lucy Letby was found not guilty of those counts. But I think the takeaway from those statements, the thing that most people at home watching will take away from it, is the fact that they say that they feel now that justice has been served. Lucy Letby, who carried out 7 murders and 7 attempted murders of 6 babies, of course, one of the babies she attempted to murder on 2 different occasions. That woman, that former nurse who was entrusted to take care of babies at the Countess of Chester Hospital, she will now be known forevermore as the most prolific serial killer of children in modern British history.
Sophie, thank you so much for bringing us that and for standing there at that press conference. Views on the scene. Also listening to the press conference was the former Met detective Peter Blexley. And Peter, apologies for interrupting you there to take us to that press conference. First of all, your reaction to what was said.
The most powerful word that came out of those 3 statements that we heard, for me, was dignity. When people spoke about the dignity that the victims' parents, carers have shown throughout. And I have nothing but the utmost respect for those people who, in the midst of their deepest, darkest, ongoing grief, because it is the victims' parents that will have a life sentence, they will simply never get over what happened to their babies, and yet they find it within themselves to carry themselves with dignity. What remarkable, wonderful people they must be.
For the officers, Peter, investigating the case, they had to turn up at the homes of families who had lost babies, who were already grieving for their loss. They're trying to deal with that. And then officers have to tell them that someone who is supposed to be caring for their little one could now be responsible for their deaths. I mean, how hard must it be for officers to deliver that information to grieving families?
Yes, well, we heard thanks being given to family liaison officers on behalf of the victims' parents, and I'm sure the family liaison officers will very much appreciate those clearly heartfelt words. It is a job for a particular kind of police officer to liaise with families. They develop a particular type of skills, and of course they have very specialised training. Not every cop is cut out for that kind of work. I certainly wasn't, but fortunately many are. And of course that relationship goes way beyond the breaking of bad news. They keep people updated throughout. And in this incredibly long trial of 7 months of evidence and a month of deliberations, the contact will have been frequent, regular, often, and so a relationship is built up. I'm just hoping that now, as some crumbs of justice, of comfort are there now for the victims' parents, that the support will be ongoing, as we heard. And I'm not in favour of capital punishment. I'm really not. But people like this wicked, abominable creature Letby really make me challenge my thinking. And I would suspect that there will be others listening to this ghastly but welcome news that would actually like to see her with a rope around her neck. But that, of course, will simply not happen.
Yeah, I think that will be the view of many people. That's reflecting the thoughts and perhaps the emotional response of many people finding out the details of this case, perhaps for the first time. It was striking to hear that there were 145 days of gruelling evidence. Is that simply a function of how many babies were killed, how complex this case was? Or is there something else behind how long this case took?
Well, in a case like this, with so many charges on the indictment, there were 22 counts on the indictment. So you can imagine that each and every case has to be gone through very carefully with the evidence individually presented to support each count on the indictment. And as each case progresses through the court, it is almost normal for legal matters to arise, which barristers want to discuss with a judge without the jury being present, for example. So often the jury have to come in and out of the court time and time again when matters of law, which are not for their ears, are discussed. So it comes as no surprise to me that this trial took so long, but it is just so astonishing that the jury, that the prosecutors and that the police did such a remarkable job. It is truly, truly outstanding. And I think for once we should be very grateful that the work has been conducted so professionally without, of course, taking our eye off the ball, that these matters will need to be looked into by an independent inquiry to see exactly what went wrong way back in 2015, 2016, for example. But let's not take our eye off the ball today. Lucy Letby is wicked, evil, almost beyond compare, and fortunately, she will never taste freedom again.
Former Met Detective Peter Blexley, thank you for your thoughts here on GB News. If you are just joining us, a reminder of our breaking news. After a trial lasting more than 10 months, the jury in the Lucy Letby trial have delivered their verdict. They have found the former nurse guilty of the murder and attempted murder of babies while she was working on the neonatal unit at the Countess of Chester Hospital. She is now the most prolific killer of babies in modern times here in the UK. Our North West of England reporter Sophie Reaper has this report.
Oh, Lucy, is it?
The most horrific crime possible, the murder of a baby. Back in 2018, Lucy Letby was arrested on suspicion of just that.
Did you have any concerns that there was a rise in the mortality rate?
Yes.
Okay, so tell me about that. What concerns did you have?
I think we don't just notice as a team in general, the nursing staff, that this was a rise compared to previous years.
New parents here at the Countess of Chester Hospital put their trust in the staff on its neonatal unit. That was only to find out later that one of the nurses was a killer.
As the number of incidents on the unit began to rise, so did the suspicions of Lucy Letby's colleagues. This ultimately prompted an investigation by Cheshire Constabulary to try and provide some answers for the heartbroken families involved.
I think it's hard to imagine what the families are going through. I think she used a cover of trust that she'd gained, the trust of parents, the trust of her colleagues and her friends, to commit these crimes in such an unimaginable way.
In October of last year, Lucy Letby's trial began as the former nurse faced charges of murdering 7 babies and attempting to murder a further 10. A jury at Manchester Crown Court sat week after week, month after month, hearing details about each of the babies involved, from child A all the way through to child Q. Lucy Letby watched on from the dock as the court was shown images from her home and hospital rotas which identify her as the only person working at the time of every single incident. The evidence also included a series of handwritten notes found amongst the former nurse's belongings, on one of which she'd written things like, "I killed them on purpose because I'm not good enough, and I am evil, I did this." Then, almost 8 months after the trial began, the defendant took to the stand for the very first time. She maintained her innocence throughout, telling the court she'd been devastated by the accusations. She said, "I only ever did my best to care for them." But ultimately, her defence wasn't enough for the jury, and the nurse, once trusted to care for defenceless babies, was found guilty of murder. Sophie Reaper, GB News.
A reminder there of what has transpired over the last 9 months, 10 months. Well, Mike Neville, the former Met Detective Chief Inspector, joins us now in the studio. Mike, good to see you, albeit in such horrific circumstances. Your reaction to this police investigation that lasted 2 years, growing from initially 8 people to 70 individuals working on this case?
Well, I've got to congratulate Cheshire Constabulary. I think they've done a very good investigation here in very complex circumstances. Many of those babies would have been very premature. They would have been suffering from all sorts of medical conditions. And so it would have been very easy to say they've died of natural causes. And the medical professionals that did the post-mortems and like gathered all that complex evidence that's been presented. The trial lasted so long because of the complexity of this evidence. So, of course, my condolences to the parents is paramount, but I really think the police here have done an excellent job. I think what the hospital have got to look into is how did this go on? How was these patterns not spotted? And there's even reports in the media about colleagues, saying, when the bells went off because there's an emergency, they were saying, is Lucy on night duty? So colleagues obviously suspected something.
We are just hearing, actually, that a press conference at the hospital is due to start very shortly. We will, of course, update people with that. Lucy Letby, she was arrested initially, she was questioned, then she was released on bail, then she was arrested again. That gives us an insight into how complex it is, but also how perhaps calculating a woman she is. We call her a woman. I mean, she's a killer, she's a murderer. But she was able to give this impression of being a good nurse.
Yeah, absolutely. Even worse, used in publicity campaigns by the hospital to say how wonderful she is. That's the aura that she gave off, this wonderful, caring person, pretty girl. So the people are using her in the press, they're using her in the media. But behind that, a wickedness. Where did that wickedness come from? And was that wickedness in her? Did she become a nurse because she knew she could use her evil powers? Or did it somehow come on once she became a nurse and she saw the opportunities of these seriously ill children that she could kill and seriously injure?
There are growing calls now for a public inquiry into what on earth has happened here. Is that something that you would back?
I absolutely would back that, because we've had, again, doctors have come forward and said they made their concerns known to the authorities and were basically silent. So the NHS has got to look at how does that happen, that a professional can come forward and nothing happen? And that somebody be allowed to carry on killing children, that's just appalling.
It does show the, perhaps, halo around those who we place individuals close to us in the care of. And it does show perhaps a blind spot that many people might have for people in certain professions. How best as a society do we move on from that? How best do we look past that perhaps innate trust, which is well placed in the vast majority of cases, it's a very difficult line to walk.
It is. I mean, look at Shipman. There's actually people coming forward and criticising the police for arresting him and saying what a wonderful GP he was. You know, we've had the case of Beverly Allett was also found guilty of 13 murders or seriously injuring children. And how do we move on from it? Well, we've got to be assured, I think, that if patterns start to emerge, then there's a very quick investigation. It seemingly takes too long. Colleagues are often reticent to report somebody, particularly in the medical world, because you assume that everybody wants to be like you and help everybody. But somehow we've got to be sure that the professionals will spot patterns and report matters if they think colleagues have done something wrong. We've got to be assured of that as the public.
OK. Mike Neville, former Met Detective Chief Inspector, thank you for talking to us this afternoon.
Well, joining us now is the former solicitor for Rose West, Leo Goatley. Leo, this is an extraordinary case, but I suppose one that does echo murders in history. We've been talking a lot about the most prolific child murderers in British history. At one point, Rose West was considered to have that accolade. Do you see similarities in this case?
I'm not sure if there are similarities. Both, of course, are prolific. I think that the most concerning thing about the Letby case is the breach of trust, the abominable breach of trust by her because of the special position she was in. This was a neonatal ward for the most vulnerable human beings alive. Children born prematurely, children with illnesses. This should have been the place where they had the best chance to live. And they were so cruelly taken away. You know, my feelings are for the sadness and despair of the parents and families. I think it's dreadful. With Rose West, there was betrayal by her and Fred in that they did offer tea and sympathy to many of their victims, where they were running away from difficult situations in children's homes. And then they would, of course, abuse them for their sexual gratification, and those young teenage girls would end up murdered. But I just think that the wickedness is more insidious, and it's something you don't really want to believe that this can be really the way it is. I think Lucy Letby had a strong defence from what I can gather. No one can be sure of what the evidence is and precisely how strong the arguments are unless you're in court. And of course, this was a very lengthy trial. So you just hope against hope that this can't be true. So it is most distressing, very distressing, that this could happen. I think these kind of wicked, aberrant situations are very, very rare. I think Fred and Rose West were very rare, and I think even more rare would be the prospect of an evil enterprise within a hospital with such innocent victims.
Leo, what do you think it is about the psyche of these women who kill repeatedly, who are so cool and calm on the surface, but evil and calculating underneath?
I'm not sure if you can draw some common denominator. I think in Rose West's case, she was a very damaged person from an early age. She had suffered a lot of abuse. She and Fred West dovetailed. Fred West had been abused and had already been a killer before he met Rose West. And I think Rose West had this contained extreme violence that she would unleash. And of course, there was the sexual dimension, which was certainly promoted by Fred West. With Lucy Letby, it's much more difficult to fathom what on earth motivated her. motivation doesn't matter. The jury have found her guilty of 7 murders and 7 attempted murders. But as for her psyche, as for what prompted this, I don't know enough about Lucy Letby to say. There must be something that in her life that somehow was a trigger for this, but I don't know. And presumably, hopefully, the authorities will want to try and understand her during what is likely to be a very long, probably whole life incarceration.
Now, Lucy Letby maintained her innocence through the course of this trial. She pled not guilty, although for the last few days of this trial, she did not turn up to sit in the dock. She avoided looking at the victims' families in the eye. Why might that have been? I believe we might have lost
Leo Goatley, the former solicitor for Rose West. It's interesting talking about the background of Lucy Letby. We're hearing that Rose West was a very damaged woman, but actually Lucy Letby seemed to have a very regular upbringing. She was from Hereford. She lived with her parents. Her parents were actually in court watching the trial from the public gallery. She attended a local school. She went to sixth form college. She told jurors in court that she'd always wanted to work with children. You know, she had a very average upbringing. Doesn't seem to appear to be the damaged upbringing that other prolific killers have had.
And yet Liverpool Women's NHS Foundation Trust have now launched an investigation into the hospital where Lucy Letby had her training placements, trying to find out if there were any clues at the start of her career as a nurse. And I wonder if, as time goes on, we might hear some more clues, perhaps about her childhood, perhaps about how she might have been different growing up, although maybe not. Maybe there's something just clicked there. It's incredibly difficult to know.
And we heard there from the police family liaison officer during that press conference a few minutes ago saying that for some of the families, they will never know why it happened to their babies, to their precious ones, talking about how heartbroken, devastated and angry they are. The families of the victims are absolutely stunned by what has happened, saying that to lose a baby or to have a baby harmed in these sorts of circumstances by a woman, and remember, these are babies that could fit into the palm of her hand. They were vulnerable, they were sick, and she was caring for them, and for them to be killed in those circumstances, they cannot, understandably, get their head around it.
It's so unspeakably evil to think of some little child who was so defenceless. There is nothing they could do to protect themselves, and the evil that must have been within the heart and the mind of Lucy Letby as she killed them. But perhaps the most concerning thing about what we've learnt today is those 6 counts where there was a hung jury. Those 6 individuals who died, who the jury could not decide if they were killed or if they died of natural causes. That must be torturous for those families.
Absolutely. We cannot imagine it if it hasn't happened to us. But Detective Superintendent Paul Hughes of Cheshire Police has spoken about the investigation and says he can't yet rule out Lucy Letby's involvement in more deaths. Let's take a listen.
At the time, in June 2018, which is when I declared suspect status and criminality and brought the parents in and told them, at this time, this is what we believe, and the only way to move the investigation forward was to arrest Lucy Letby. And the reason for that was primarily that we could put her at the scene of all the collapses and deaths, and therefore she was the constant. And being the constant, she was our biggest source of information, if you take it in its truest sense. So being the biggest source of our evidence, we want to speak to her, and she needs the rights of a suspect. So the only way to do that was under arrest and to search her property to see if there's anything that would take us towards her, away from that thought process. That took place, and the wheel continued to turn, if you like, and Lucy Letby was cooperative. She told us her version of events, but she didn't take it any further. She was very clinical and without remorse or empathy or thought process around what it was. We would be foolish if we were to think that we have gathered all cases that Lucy Letby could have touched in one go. You know, we are proud of our investigation, but we're not that good to say we've got everything in one go. So we're committed to doing a overarching investigation, looking at every single baby's admission into neonatal unit for the entire footprint that Lucy Letby's been employed, which is over 4,000 babies across both the Liverpool Women's Hospital and the Countess of Chester. The results at court, I don't think, would close things enough for them as parents, and certainly from knowing them and speaking to them, that is a question they would love to know. You know, why? Not only why did she do it, but why did she choose their children? Unfortunately, I think unless Lucy Letby decides to tell us that, I don't think we'll ever know.
That's astonishing, isn't it? Detective Superintendent Paul Hughes of Cheshire Police speaking there. The investigation is not over. They are looking into the deaths of some 4,000 babies that were in the hospitals that killer Lucy Letby worked at, Mike. Still much more. Mike Neville is still with us, former Detective Chief Inspector for the Met. Still much more work for detectives to do.
Absolutely, and painstaking work as well. You know, many of those babies have, been buried. You know, the bodies don't exist anymore. So that's all they'll have to go through is different notes and speaking to medical professionals who perhaps retired, and they'll have to find them. And so this is a lot of work. But it's good to see that Cheshire Police are doing that because that'll bring reassurance to. Because there'll be many other parents whose children died in hospitals in the Northwest, thinking, was Lucy Letby, who was that nurse who I never spoke to, was on the night duty when my little baby died? And so lots of parents will be concerned about that. And I just think that the Cheshire Police are assuring people that they're going to look into everything. And I think people are realistic as well. They know how difficult this investigation will be. But I think they'll be reassured that the Detective Superintendent is doing that.
It does seem quite precise that this investigation that led to this trial lasted from, well, was covering the period from June 2015 to June 2016. It might be quite hard for some people to believe that this mass killer only operated precisely within a 12-month window. Perhaps there is good reason for the police to think that there were other deaths on top of those that have been found today.
Absolutely, there's other reasons. But what you find, if you look at the parallel with Beverly Allitt, she was also a very even smaller timescale. So the police will know there'll be all sorts of efforts, I imagine, with psychologists to try and interview Lucy Letby to find out why and get us extra clues as to, let's check back, but what was the trigger point for that? And I say sometimes these people operate, something happens and then there's this small time period, but there'll be so many parents that children die in these wards because they're very ill or very premature, but they'll want every reassurance that their child wasn't murdered.
Mike Neville, thank you for the moment. Just some more reaction coming in, this time from the Parliamentary and Health Service Ombudsman, calling for significant improvements to culture and leadership across the NHS in the wake of Lucy Letby's conviction, branding it one of the darkest crimes ever committed in our health service.
Absolutely harrowing. Let's get more now from Sophie Reaper, who joins us live from outside Manchester Crown Court. Sophie, of course, you have been following this trial for a long time. It must have been the most astonishing atmosphere, particularly on the days when Lucy Letby was in court herself.
Absolutely. Of course, this trial has been going on now since October of last year, over 10 months ago. Absolutely unprecedented in our legal system for a trial really to ever go on for this long. The atmosphere in the room has fluctuated as the days have gone on. Of course, there have been days, like you say, when Lucy Letby herself took to the stand that have been particularly tense. There were days where
she became too emotional, and that facade that we've seen of her as she sat in the dock hearing all of the evidence throughout this trial. She's been calm, she's been cool, she's been collected, but there were those days when she was giving evidence in the dock that we did see the facade slip, we did see some tears, and there was even one occasion where proceedings had to stop for the day because things just became too much for the defendant. Of course, we're at a point now where she's actually refusing to come up to the dock at all throughout the process of verdicts being delivered. That first day, we saw real waterworks from Lucy Letby as she found out she'd been found guilty of 2 attempted murders. And then the next time we saw her was the delivery of verdicts, including 4 murders. But throughout those, she seemed stony-faced. She didn't really have any reaction. Perhaps at that point she was resigned to her fate. Her mother, on the other hand, though, was just completely inconsolable. And from that point on, we haven't really seen the defendant again, even in a morning when the judge would be sending the jury out to recommence their deliberations. Lucy Letby would refuse to come to the dock. Now, that in itself is a highly controversial decision, because what it means is that on that sentencing on Monday, we won't most likely see Lucy Letby. She won't be there to face the families of her victims, those 7 babies who we now know she's been found guilty of murdering. And this is an issue that has become highly prevalent in court, several cases over the years. Thomas Cashman, Jordan McSweeney, of course, the murderer of Zara Alina, they both refused to come to court, to come to the dock, to face their sentencing, and it seems now we'll have the same issue with Lucy Letby.
Sophie, thank you. Do stay with us for more reaction here on GB News. Lucy Letby, the UK's most prolific child killer of modern times. She is sentenced on Monday. Stay with us.
A brighter outlook with Boxed Solar. Proud sponsors of weather on GB News.
Hi there, it's Aidan McGivern here from the Met Office with the GB News forecast. Low pressure is arriving overnight, increasingly strong winds ahead of it, heavy rain as well, and the risk of thunderstorms, especially for eastern parts of England during the early hours of Saturday. Here's the low that's approaching, developing quickly. That's going to bring strengthening winds both ahead and during the period in which that low pressure crosses the UK. But before the low arrives, actually, showery rain pushes north, easing for a time, drier conditions for Scotland, northeast England and southern parts for a time. Some sunshine coming through, but a lot of cloud, and with the breeze as well, it's not going to feel particularly hot. 23, 24 Celsius, albeit with increased humidity. Then the low pushes in. Very strong winds developing across western parts. Gales through Irish Sea coast in particular, and West Wales at the southwest of England seeing the strongest winds during the evening. During the early hours,